Yeah, hello everyone. Welcome and good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world at this moment in time. So today is the last session of the grand jury of the Court of Public Opinion. And today we're going to listen to the closing arguments of all the lawyers involved. And we've been doing investigation into the crimes committed during the corona crisis and the crisis of the measures that have been taken. And today we're going to see what our judges have our lawyers have put together in order to make it, to convince you, the audience, to make up your mind if you want to go for like indictment of the protagonists in this whole crisis. We're going to have a voting opportunity that's going to be revealed at the end of the session today, and then you can vote on whether you would like to see the protagonists put into like criminal charges or not. Yeah, so I would like to start today and give the floor to our judge, Rui Fonseca y Castro, and he will make a summary of the last session. You're still muted.
Good evening. Summary of the last session of the grand jury model proceeding. First, we had Dr. Matthias Desmet, professor at Ghent University, and the clinical psychologist, and Dr. Mark Miller, professor at New York University. They talked about the phenomenon of mass formation and the role of the media to achieve it during the crisis of the fake corona pandemic. Dr. Matthias Desmet explained mass formation as a specific kind of group formation, having a very specific impact on individuals' psychological functioning. One of the most common characteristics of people under the effect of mass formation is the suppression of their critical thinking, says Dr. Matthias Desmet, allowing them to commit the most cruel and barbaric acts even against their once beloved family and friends. Technology allows now the elites, with the collaboration of the media worldwide, to be able to influence people in order to create mass formation that better fits to them, for them to stay in power, even with politics that go against the populations. Since the mass formation doesn't last very long unless the elite keeps feeding people with propaganda, the elite also needs to control the media in order to maintain the bombardment with propaganda through news and advertising. By doing so, the elites manage to execute measures that will isolate people and make individuals more vulnerable and disconnected from their social environment, and also more obedient. That sums up what happened during these last 2 years. Then we had Dr. Ulrich Kammerer, professor at Würzburg University, expert in human biology, immunology, and cellular biology, that explained how the PCR test works and why it is technically not able to decide if a sample which is found positive is indicative of an infectious, contagious person. And even if performed under perfect conditions, can't be used as gold standards and basis for non-medical actions intended to stop a spread of a virus, since all the active material is destroyed in the process. Explained how the PCR test with the Drosten protocol, Christian Drosten protocol, actually started to be misused intentionally as a diagnostic tool, and also how bad that PCR test design can lead to a massive number of false positives, which was actually the pillar of this fake pandemic that is still going on, but it was the crisis, the peak it was during the last 2 years. So now I give the floor for the panel for the closing arguments. Thank you.
Yeah, and Dr. Rainer Füllmich, attorney at law in Germany and also in America, in California, is now the first one to present his closing arguments. Rainer, please proceed.
Yes, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if any legal case that has ever been brought to the attention of a jury was a call for justice, it is this one. This case is screaming out for justice to be rendered. This is not a trial. It is not even a mock trial. Rather, it is a model grand jury investigation designed to show the people and the judiciaries of this world what needs to be done and how it actually can be done. This model grand jury investigation has put all available evidence before the people, and we now ask the jury for indictments against 6 representative putative defendants: Professor Dr. Christian Drosten of Charité University in Berlin, Dr. Anthony Fauci, head of the NIAID in the United States, Dr. Tedros of the World Health Organization, Bill Gates of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, of Gavi and many other such vehicles, BlackRock, and finally Pfizer. This model investigation does not ask for guilty verdicts, but it does ask you, the jury, to return indictments against all 6 putative defendants based on the evidence that has been presented to us in the course of this proceeding. My favorite character in a movie about the law is Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird, played by Gregory Peck, who won an Oscar for his performance as Best Actor. Up until the very end of his closing argument, the camera never shows him addressing the jury. And that is because the real jury were the people who watched that movie. Just as in this model proceeding, it is you, our viewers, the people who are the jury. And even though I and my esteemed colleagues are, unlike Atticus Finch in that movie, not asking you to return a verdict, in that case, one that saved his wrongly accused client's life, I do wish to paraphrase part of the last sentence Atticus Finch said to the jury. For God's sake, believe our witnesses. This is, in our opinion, the only way we can stop the murderous madness that is taking place all over the world. By looking at the evidence, in particular by listening to the testimonies of our expert witnesses, taking it seriously, and becoming aware of the story of murderous madness that it tells us. So let us now turn to the evidence. Matthew Ehret, Alex Thompson, Brian Garish, and Whitney Webb explain to us the historical backdrop to all that has been happening for 2.5 years now, the destruction of people's livelihoods, their health, and their lives. Their testimony tells us one thing very clearly. In particular, if you look at the totality of the evidence, that is, if you see how their testimony connects with that of the other expert witnesses. This is not a pandemic, but it is a plandemic, cooked up by the twisted fantasies of super-rich, megalomaniac psychopaths in order to further their ideas of eugenics and gaining complete control over everything and everybody. Worse yet, it is eugenics turning into genocide, which many of the main players in this dystopian James Bond movie are pushing. It all started in the 1850s with Charles Darwin and Herbert Spencer talking about the survival of the fittest. Then, in the early 20th century, the usual suspects, Anglo-American oligarchs among them, founded first the British and then the American Eugenics Society, whose members believed that some people are simply genetically better than others, and that a genetic selection should be made by those psychopaths, of course. Then came World Wars I and II, which were financed by these very same oligarchs. And after World War II, the same people started the Cold War to keep people in fear and in panic mode. Why? Because the ultimate goal of all this is to gain control over all those inferior people through population reduction and introducing their one world government and their one world bank along with a digital currency controlled by them. At the same time, right after World War II had ended and right before the Nuremberg trials began to deal with the crimes against humanity committed by Hitler, UNESCO was founded. Its first director was the president of the British Eugenics Society and, oddly enough, co-founder of the World Wildlife Fund, Julian Huxley. He gave a speech in which he declared that eugenics had been given a bad name by Hitler's actions, but that soon he and his fellow eugenicists would be able to talk about eugenics openly again. In 1971, these same people, through their major deep state tool, the CIA, and with the help of Henry Kissinger, had Klaus Schwab found the World Economic Forum in order to influence European politics. In 1992, this conglomerate of super-rich owners of global corporations, politicians, and media people founded the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leaders Program, which proceeded to produce the very politicians which we were then to vote into office. Among the first to graduate, Angela Merkel and Bill Gates. Current graduates and affiliates include, for example, Emmanuel Macron of France, Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand, Ursula von der Leyen of the EU, and Justin Trudeau of Canada. And Klaus Schwab openly boasts that the World Economic Forum has infiltrated half of the Canadian Parliament. Again, the ultimate goal of these people's megalomaniac fantasies is population control, involving massive population reduction and getting the survivors to agree to two things. One, a one world government under the WEF controlled UN. And two, get the agreement to a one world digital currency issued by their one world bank according to the guidelines of the Chinese social credit system. In order to get there, they need to create as much chaos, fear, and panic as possible so that the people will ultimately give in to their demands. As Hermann Goering said when asked how Hitler and he got the Germans to commit all those unspeakable atrocities, he said, fear, that is all that it takes. Fear, regardless of what kind of government you have. The two first world wars were hot, loud wars. They seem to have given way now to a more subtle and at the same time much more effective silent war, a virus pandemic, which, as it turns out, is still under the control of the military, as we've seen in whistleblower Brooke Jackson's Pfizer trial, which all of a sudden revealed that the Department of Defense was in charge of the Pfizer medical trial. In that judiciary proceeding, Pfizer's surprising defense to the allegation of having conducted a sham trial, having doctored all the numbers, having destroyed their control group, and having withheld the data that shows how dangerous and ineffective their drug was, is we did not have to follow any rules. We were under a special agreement, a so-called OTA, Other Transaction Authority agreement, with the Department of Defense to supply them with prototypes. The first exercise that led in the direction of the current virus pandemic was, as we learned from retired Lieutenant Colonel Jim Bush, the military Operation Dark Winter in 2001. Then came Operation Lockstep in 2010, conducted by the Rockefeller Foundation, and finally Event 201, brought to us by the usual suspects, the WEF, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. This, the idea of waging war through a pandemic, is also how the WHO came into the picture, replacing tanks, rockets, and hand grenades as their major tool to create worldwide panic by declaring a pandemic. Or, as they prefer to call it, using a more sophisticated and important sounding phrase, a public health emergency of international concern, whose acronym is, not by accident, they are laughing at us, pronounced fake. Doctors Stuckelberger and Barron, former employees and advisors to the WHO, told us they did not have any cases when they wanted to roll out their long-planned agenda in early 2020. Therefore, they used the fake German Professor Drosten, who should have lost all credibility during the swine flu, which ultimately turned out to be nothing but a mild flu, as his modeling was just as completely often devoid of any contact with reality as that of Neil Ferguson's from the UK. They had forecast, then as now, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of deaths if people don't get vaccinated. The same Drosten, who failed so miserably during the swine flu, was eager to do their bidding once again. He obliged by creating the cases that they needed for the declaration of a fake public health emergency of international concern. He first invented the lie of asymptomatic infections, which laid the foundation for indiscriminate mass PCR testing of perfectly healthy people. And then, of course, the crucial lie that his variation of the PCR test can detect infections. That is, it can tell us who is infected with the virus and therefore dangerous, that is, contagious to others. Professor Kemmerer, Dr. Pekova, Professor Cahill, and Dr. Mike Yeadon explained in great detail to us that a PCR test can under no circumstances tell us anything about infections, as it cannot distinguish between dead and live matter. If a person tests positive, it may very well be because the test finds the old remnants of the body's successful fight against the flu or a cold, both of which very frequently contain the coronavirus. And it never finds a whole virus, which is needed for an infection. It only finds fragments, sequences of a virus, as what is taken from the swab is completely destroyed before it goes into the testing machine. Worst of all, they told us brilliant and witty Nobel Prize laureate Kary Mullis's great scientific tool, the PCR test, was purposefully misused to create cases out of thin air. Drosten, whose variation of the PCR test, which then served as a blueprint for all other PCR testing and was recommended to the entire world as the gold standard for the detection of infections by the WHO, had set his test at 45 cycles of amplification. 45 cycles of amplification, which was literally guaranteed to create cases, but only false positive ones. Dr. Mike Yeadon stated, and everyone else from the scientific community confirms this, plus putative defendant Fauci himself, that at 35 cycles of amplification, you end up with roughly 90% false positives. And why did they need these false positive cases at all costs? Dr. Stuckelberger and Behrendt gave us the answer. They needed the cases because they wanted to declare a public health emergency of international concern, the fake, which in turn was the only basis on which they could, according to their own freely invented rules, use untested new drugs on people. This means the so-called vaccinations are solely based on these artificially created non-cases. These shots are therefore, as there is no factual basis for them if you discount the fake cases generated with the help of the misused PCR test, wholly unnecessary. Wholly unnecessary. Furthermore, as doctors Brian Ardis and Shankara Chetty's testimony made clear, there are many alternative or real methods of treatment that can easily and safely deal with COVID-19, which is in reality, as even the WHO recognizes, no more dangerous than the common flu. But doctors all over the Western world would be punished by the authorities if they used these effective treatments, such as ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, vitamin C, D, zinc, etc., etc. But it's even worse. Not only are these shots not necessary, they're neither effective, as evidenced by the examples of Israel and the UK, where more than 90% of the hospitalized people with COVID symptoms are at least twice vaccinated, nor are they safe. As we now know, Pfizer did not even conduct real medical trials. They doctored all the numbers and destroyed their own control groups, covering up all the deaths and serious adverse reactions, including systematic sterilization. To emphasize this important point, let me say this again. As Pfizer now claims in the Brooke-Jackson trial, as a defense, they did not have to adhere to any rules under the OTA agreement with the Department of Defense. Rather, they were only required to show that they can deliver prototypes. British undertaker John O'Looney explained to us how he, too, originally believed the official cooked-up narrative of a very dangerous pandemic and even tried to help spread it, until he, as an undertaker, saw the incredible damage that the so-called vaccines were doing, in particular to younger people. He also experienced firsthand how they tried to actually kill him by way of getting him, when he fell ill, allegedly with COVID, to agree to the official treatment protocol, which includes being put on a respirator. Dr. Brian Ardis confirmed this kind of intentional, in the sense of malicious, systematic malpractice when he went into the details of the official treatment protocol in the US as ordered by Fauci, based on fake studies produced for the WHO. Doctors were told to not use the very safe and effective ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine, but rather use remdesivir, which killed many people in at least 2 studies that putative defendant Fauci knows about. Professors Gatti, Bhakti, Henrion-Court, and Dr. Schmidt-Krüger explained that these shots are not actually vaccinations, as they do not provide immunity. Rather, they're genetic experiments. They went on to explain how there are all kinds of strange and dangerous nanoparticles in the vials, how the lipid nanoparticles, the mRNA, and the highly toxic spike protein are extremely dangerous, and how the vaccine, the so-called vaccine, doesn't stay at the injection site, but rather it moves through the entire body, including the brain, rapidly. Within 48 hours, whatever is in the vials is everywhere, and no one knows when the spike production stops. It causes serious blood clotting, with the end result of, among other things, often fatal myocarditis and cerebral venous thrombosis. Worst of all, the shots destroy the immune system in such a way that many of the resulting deaths will spread over a period of 2 or 3 years, thus making it hard for those who will suffer health problems because of the shots to understand that it is indeed the shots that cause them. Pathologist Professor Burkhardt, in collaboration with a team of now 50 pathologists from all over the world, has performed numerous autopsies on people who died after getting the shots and found the shots to be the cause of their death in some 70% of the cases with certainty, and in some 20% of the cases with probability. The others died of other causes. The big question that everyone automatically asks when they hear and understand all of this is, how on earth could they get so many people to play along? Expert witnesses Meredith Miller and Dr. Ariane Billerand explained about the carefully planned, devious psychological terrorism which had led people to trust the deceitful orders they were given by the authorities. Meredith Miller compared it to an abusive relationship. Ariane Billerand explained about the Stockholm Syndrome. Both confirmed that this is the result of a long-planned, carefully exercised psychological warfare to destabilize and disorient the people by inducing fear and panic. Professor Matthias Desmet, the world's foremost expert on the phenomenon of mass formation, told us the deliberate creation of loneliness, disorientation, the feeling of lacking any real purpose in life over the past decades had led to a pervasive feeling in society of free-floating anxiety. And this was the most important ingredient for their feeding the population the corona pandemic as something to cling to, so that all of a sudden there was a purpose in life. No more free-floating anxiety, but a target for this anxiety, corona, and everyone who dared ask questions about it. His most important message is we need to keep talking and getting the truth out. This will ultimately turn the tide, as everything we do in that direction has an effect, regardless of whether it can be seen immediately or not. Professor Mark Crispin Miller explained how the mainstream media are owned by the same WEF-based people who own our politicians, and how these media are being used for their massive, unrelenting, fear-porn propaganda attacks. Interestingly, everyone is aware of the fact that propaganda is being used against the enemy, or whomever they frame for us as the enemy. But hardly anyone is aware that in 2014, the Obama administration made it legal to use propaganda to attack and manipulate the American people. Patrick Wood, Leslie Manookian, Björn Pirwitz, and Professor Christian Kreis, all of them economists, explained how the destruction of the economy, or to be more precise, of small and medium-sized businesses, was intentionally done because these businesses are the truly creative and independent ones. They stand in the way of their taking over the entire economy and controlling it through mindless Silicon Valley platforms such as Amazon and Uber. Leslie Manookian told us how both Europe and the US are completely broke and buried under an unpayable mountain of debt. Europe even worse than the US, with all of its pension funds having been depleted by the very same people and institutions who are pushing COVID, monkeypox, and now the war in Ukraine to distract our attention from the very fact that they are responsible for the dire economic situation we're in, and of course, to reach their goal of complete control over all of us. Patrick Wood explained how technocracy has been used since the 1930s to gain control and achieve that goal of transferring everything to these mindless platforms. Björn Pirwitz showed us from an investment banker's venture capitalist point of view, and Christian Kreis from a former investment banker's and professor of economics point of view, with a surprising hint at spirituality, how the other side's path is a path to complete destruction of the economy. On day 6 of this investigation, Patrick Wood and Matthew Ehret dove deeper into eugenics as the basis for all of which is happening, explaining in more detail how they, that is the other side, are using technocracy and its offspring transhumanism as tools to that end. Ilana Rachel Daniel and Avital Livni gave us disturbing insights into how the Israeli population is being decimated by the shots and lied to about the efficacy and safety of the shots. Vera Sharaf, a Holocaust survivor, implored everyone to not ignore the parallels between what is happening now and what happened in the Third Reich. How the never again cry has gone unheard as another, possibly far worse genocide is happening right now, committed by the same players or their descendants and institutions. Based upon these facts, we asked the jury to return indictments against all 6 representative putative defendants. Drosten must be indicted because he provided them with the tool, his PCR test variation, to create non-cases as a justification for declaring a fake, which was their only basis for all of the measures, in particular, the genetic experiments which they call vaccinations. He knew that he was lying when he claimed that his test could detect infections, as evidenced by his interview given in 2014 to the German business magazine Wirtschaftswoche, where he emphasized that even perfectly healthy people may test falsely positive. If we can see this slide right now, it'll make the point clearer.
Would you like me to read this? I mean, it's German, but we're going to have the translation.
I think it's okay. We will make it available on our website so that everyone who wants to read it and get it translated can check that this is precisely what he said. He said in 2014 that if a nurse tests positive, that was the MERS virus, which is a variation of the coronavirus, that if she tests positive, it doesn't mean a thing. She could be perfectly healthy. Fauci, who is the next putative defendant, must be indicted because he too knows that a PCR test cannot tell us anything about infections, especially not when it is set at 35 cycles of amplification. Maybe we can show that short clip explaining, with Fauci explaining about this.
All right. There have been a number of reports of patients who shed viral RNA for weeks, as determined by PCR. It doesn't seem to be infectious virus. And the real question is, are they a threat for transmission? And I'm wondering if you think we could use a cutoff of viral loads determined by PCR to say this patient is no longer infectious, can go home, can go to a nursing facility. Because right now the physicians are really having a hard time with that.
Right. Again, a good question. And what is now sort of evolving into a bit of a standard that if you get a cycle threshold of 35 or more, that the chances of it being replication competent are minuscule. So that if somebody, and we have patients, and it's very frustrating for the patients as well as for the physicians. Somebody comes in and they repeat their PCR and it's like 37 cycle threshold. But you almost never can culture virus from a 37 threshold cycle. So I think if somebody does come in with 37, 38, even 36, you got to say, it's just dead nucleotides, period.
Yeah, because as you know, we can't easily culture infectious virus. You don't have a BSL-3 lab everywhere.
Exactly.
Okay.
So is the threshold cycle is reporting out a pretty standard practice in doing a diagnosis now rather than just positive or negative? Okay, good.
Yeah, I mean, if when you go in, when I get my test, it's negative. When someone comes in and it's positive, they don't give them the threshold until you go back and ask for it.
Okay, but they've got it.
They've got it.
Right.
They've got it.
But he also knows that there is no actual necessity for vaccines because there is, as he himself says in this next clip, a thing that is called natural immunity. Let us see how he explains that. Can we please see that clip? Oh, that's unfortunate, but we can do without it. I hope you have the other clips and the other slides. Tedros must be indicted because he knowingly and willingly, as the WHO's director, plays the role of the world's executioner. He may not, as he is not a medical doctor, understand everything about the science or medicine of these crimes against humanity, but he does know about genocide, as the fact that a criminal complaint charging that he committed genocide against his own countrymen in Ethiopia indicates very vividly. Let us show that slide, please. Okay, that gives us the idea. Gates must be indicted because he profits the most from the vaccines, as he invested his money into pretty much every vaccine maker and then helped plan the pandemic, as Event 201 shows. At the same time, he proclaims that the world's population needs to be reduced substantially. We have 2 clips explaining how he actually boasts that his investment in vaccines is the most, profitable ever. And the other shows him explaining about population reduction. Please let us see these 2 clips.
We're here today with Bill Gates. A lot to talk about what he's been working on. And Mr. Gates, thank you so much for being with us. I'd like to talk to you about your approach to vaccinations. You wrote something recently, and like you always do, you kind of looked at the problem from a scientific and business perspective on things. You've invested $10 billion in vaccinations over the last 2 decades, and you figured out the return on investment for that. And it kind of stunned me. Can you walk us through the math?
Well, it's pretty impressive that when you take these vaccines, get them to be very inexpensive by making big volume commitments, have that right relationship with the private sector, get the delivery system so they're really getting the coverage out there, you literally save millions of lives. And 20 years ago, when we created these new multilateral organizations, Gavi for the vaccines, Global Fund for HIV, TB and malaria, we didn't know they'd be successful. They've gone through lots of challenges about making sure the money gets there, making sure the efficiency is right. But as we look at upcoming replenishments for those, and we've got so much distraction politically that the international needs like this could get eclipsed if we're not careful. We see a phenomenal track record. It's been $100 billion overall that the world's put in. Our foundation is a bit more than $10 billion, but we feel there's been over a 20-to-1 return. So if you just look at the economic benefits, that's a pretty strong number compared to anything else. This equation has 4 factors, a little bit of multiplication. So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to 0. And that's going to be based on the number of people, the services each person's using on average, the energy on average for each service, and the CO2 being put out per unit of energy. So let's look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to 0. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to 0. That's back from high school algebra, but let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
And now there are 3 very serious criminal investigations underway against Bill Gates in India for mass murder. BlackRock must be indicted because it is the major vehicle through which the perpetrators of these crimes against humanity funnel their money stolen from us, the people, into the global corporations through which they control the world's economy. BlackRock's chairman, Larry Fink, is a member of the board of trustees of the World Economic Forum, and in that capacity knows precisely that this is the WEF's own creation of a pandemic. There is a slide that shows how he is a member of the board of trustees at the World Economic Forum. Can we see that? Thank you. Moreover, we are in possession of a document written by BlackRock as a summary of 2019's annual meeting of the central bankers in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. It explains how unprecedented responses needed to be taken as more and more people had begun to understand who had been stealing their money and assets over the decades, resulting first in the Lehman crisis, which erupted again in September of 2019 after all that money printing. Unprecedented responses. That is precisely what we're seeing with this corona pandemic. Allow me once again to paraphrase Atticus Finch's last sentence in his closing argument in To Kill a Mockingbird. For God's sake, do believe these witnesses and indict these putative defendants. These expert witnesses have impeccable reputations and nothing to gain from their testimony. Many of them have been badly framed as right-wing Nazis because of their speaking truth to power. Just as Atticus Finch saved the life of an innocent man in that movie, we must do everything in our power to save innocent people's lives and innocent people's livelihoods from destruction by these barbarians. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rainer Füllmich, for your closing argument. And I would now like to give the floor to Deepali Ojha, attorney at law from India.
Greetings to all the esteemed members of jury. Thank you, Judge Rui Fonseca and Dr. Rainer Füllmich for your presentations. I also thank all my learned colleagues for their contribution to all the sessions that have happened till date, and also to the experts who have been the expert witnesses, and who have provided their insights and their observations drawn from their professional experience of several years. Considering the testimonies of experts, if we perform a stock-taking exercise today of all the things that went horribly wrong and were unscientific with regards to the actions of those who were responsible for formulating the pandemic response, and such actions which had a direct, disastrous, and life-changing impact on all those who were at the receiving end of this response. Considering this, we can easily draw up a list of serious, pertinent questions which are unanswered till date, but which we must pause and ponder over before it gets too late. Some questions I have listed out. I would read out to the esteemed members of jury. Why was vaccine touted as the only solution to deal with COVID-19? Who decided that there is no known medication that would be effective for treating COVID-19? Why were the physicians ignored who, at the ground level, were treating the patients with alternative early treatments like hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, and alternative therapies like Ayurveda, homeopathy, naturopathy? Why was natural medicine ignored, which has a long, rich history of treating serious ailments effectively? Why were physicians threatened with cancellation of their licenses when what they were doing is simply trying their level best to save the lives of people? Why was the decision-making concentrated and restricted only to select few who dictated to the whole world what could be done and what could not be done? Thereby, they stifled the scientific debate around the world. Why was natural immunity ignored? We have seen a lot of enthusiasm on part of authorities around the vaccines and subsequent booster doses. Why is similar level of enthusiasm missing when it comes to conducting studies on natural immunity? Nothing can be more horrific than underplaying, denying, and hiding from the public all the severe adverse events after administration of the so-called COVID-19 vaccines. If real science would have been followed, we would not have gone after testing healthy individuals. We would not have entertained the concept of asymptomatic transmission, and we would not have gone behind vaccinating the mass population amidst a pandemic. And an important aspect to this is the economic and the financial aspect. The authorities and the government authorities and the health authorities, which were responsible for formulating the pandemic response, have drawn upon very high amounts of taxpayers' money, which has gone into purchasing these so-called vaccines, which now have proved that they neither prevent infection nor do they stop transmission. And a person has to go for booster doses, never-ending booster doses, and with efficacy lowering after, say, 4 to 6 months' time, and makes a person dependent on taking these shots at regular intervals. So there is a heavy economic and financial aspect also. Next is, why were the scientists ignored who reiterated from time to time that vaccine could not be the solution for this RNA virus? We all have freedom of choice. We can deny a particular treatment and going for the treatment which we feel or which we trust would really work out for us. Why was this freedom restricted and curtailed for everybody across the globe? Now, we all know that no two people are alike when it comes to bodily constitution, pathological history, and medical background. Why was due caution not exercised while considering a person's history before thrusting these medical experimental products on every person on the earth? In Indian Penal Code, we have a particular section that defines good faith, and it says that nothing is said to be done or believed in good faith which is done or believed to be done without due care and caution. Now, the actions of these putative representative defendants are anything but totally devoid of good faith. Now, there are several other aspects as well which need our urgent and immediate attention, which my colleagues would cover in their upcoming presentations. And I'm confident that the esteemed jury members would meticulously consider all the evidences which have been advanced by the experts till date, and the jury members would arrive at an informed decision to return indictments against the 6 putative defendants. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deepali Ojha, for your closing argument. And now I would like to give the floor to Dexter Reinefeld, attorney at law from South Africa. You're mute.
Thank you very much, Vivian. And thank you so much to all my learned colleagues. There is Rainer, Judge Rui, and Advocate Deepali, Michael Swanhood, Anna Garner, and then Virginie as well. Good evening, good day, honorable members of the jury. If I have to title my closing argument, it will be COVID-19 narrative, the biggest psychological onslaught on humanity, anxiety, and fear. I hereby defer to Mrs. Vera Sharaf's evidence, one of the last Holocaust survivors, and I quote, Nazis used the same state of anxiety with fear as the common denominator. Humanity is currently confronted with an unprecedented humanitarian crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic. The question posed to each and every one of you, honorable members of the jury, is this a natural occurrence and or an intentional man-made occurrence? In answering this question, the grand jury investigated the length and the breadth of this unprecedented humanitarian crisis through the lens of natural law. In doing so, various medical, scientific, economists, investigative journalists, and lay witnesses were called upon to give their professional and personal opinions on what we as humanity are faced with. The evidence presented concluded unambiguously that the COVID-19 pandemic is not a natural occurrence, but an intentional man-made occurrence with dire consequences on the survival of humanity from a public health point of view. This brings me to the all-important public health question. What is the consequences of a WHO, World Health Organization, proclaimed public health emergency of international concern? Dr. Sylvia Barrett, evidence was clear and direct that when the World Health Organization proclaims a public health emergency of international concern, the main objective of such proclamation is to provide a regulatory...
No sound. At least not here.
Excuse me? You can hear me?
Yes, no, we can hear
Yes,
you.
everyone can hear you except for Vivian.
Okay, so I proceed.
Go ahead, Dexter.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to start with the paragraph again. This brings me to the all-important public health question. What is the consequences of a World Health Organization proclaimed public health emergency of international concern? Dr. Sylvia Barrett's evidence was clear and direct that when WHO proclaims a public health emergency of international concern, the main objective of such proclamation is to provide a regulatory pathway for vaccines manufacturing. She further stated in her evidence that a public health emergency of international concern, when proclaimed by the World Health Organization as a pandemic, have no legal consequences to it. It is merely interesting for the media. And obviously by now we have seen what the media and how they've actually used this declared, proclaimed pandemic to instill anxiety, to instill fear in the populace. Dear members of this honorable jury, just from this snippet of evidence, do we see how the COVID-19 pandemic unfolded and how the script has been planned and how it played out today, with the main objective to subject an unsuspecting populace to the poisonous experimental COVID-19 mRNA vaccines. Never ever in the history of humanity has a medical experiment been conducted on the world's populace en masse. At the same time, never ever has any medical experiment been conducted in lockstep in each and every country without any exception, with dire political, governmental, economic consequences for those countries who dare to step out of line of the acceptable poisonous COVID-19 narrative. This, of course, is only possible through meticulous planning, collaboration by all the punitive defendants and their co-conspirators in each and every country. And of course, let's not forget the instrumental fear-mongering of the mass media's role in setting the stage of fear and anxiety. Society was divided intentionally by the defendants and their many co-conspirators by the help of the mass media into pro-vax, anti-vax groups, and absolute farce that goes against constitutional and natural law of each and every citizen's sovereign identities and choice to be the sole arbiters of what they do and or put into their own bodies, with the also familiar phrase, my body, my choice. Through the concerted efforts of the defendants, a considerable portion of the citizens of the world succumb and avail themselves as willing guinea pigs in a medical experiment that never even passed the animal phase of any medical and scientific research. Evidence has shown all the animal subjects in the mRNA vaccine medical and scientific experiments died without any exception. Let's have a look and see what Code 3 of the Nuremberg Code stipulate. I, however, just need to pause that my learned friend from France, Virginie, she will go into much more detail when it comes to the applicability of the Nuremberg Code. But for purposes of just bringing across my point, I would like us to look at Code 3 of the Nuremberg Code, which I'm quickly going to read, and it reads as follows. The experiment should be so designed and based on the results of animal experimentation and a knowledge of the natural history of the disease or other problem under study, where the anticipated results will justify the performance of the experiment. Clearly, members of the jury, this was and is currently not the case with the COVID-19 mRNA vaccines. The evidence is clear. This in itself shows that the defendants was and is intentional in respect to the COVID-19 vaccines, as the animal results and the history of the SARS-CoV-2 virus is not novel, as fraudulently advanced by the defendants and the mass media. At the commencement of the proclaimed public health emergency of international concern, medical practitioners were informed not to look at the symptomology of COVID-19, but rather focus on the PCR results, a complete break from the norm in respect to how SARS-CoV-1 has been dealt with. And here we can look at the evidence of Dr. Astrid Struckelberger. This alone should suffice that the defendants and the mass media committed crimes against humanity based on natural law and the Nuremberg Code, and even to the extent of each and every country's constitutional law. There is a direct scientific correlation between the vaccines and the death of many citizens worldwide, which is now an established fact. The most serious being in Israel is stated by Avital Livni and Ilana Rachel Daniel. Professor Arne Buckert's evidence corroborates between the vaccines and the death of participants through the autopsies he and his fellow pathologists conducted. Direct evidence was also presented by Mr. John O'Looney, a United Kingdom mortician, and I quote what his evidence was. So, open quote. So the year 2020 passed and they announced that they were going to start vaccine on January 6, 2021. I had an idea at that time. In fact, I mentioned to a number of people that I suspected that the mortality rate was finally going to go up because it hadn't before. At the time, they put needles in the arms, and that's what happened. It exploded, I would say, by about 300% of the normal mortality rate. From the time they started vaccine, it was horrible. It was horrible. That's the only time in that whole 2-year period that I call it a pandemic death rate as a mortician, close quote. The evidence is clear and unambiguous that the pandemic death rate was not as a result of the COVID-19 SARS-CoV-2 virus. Rather, members of the honorable jury, it was as a direct result of the COVID-19 vaccine injuries, as stated in evidence by Mr. John O'Looney. Thus, by inference, the core objective of the defendants and the mass media was to sell the SARS-CoV-2 virus as a dangerous virus with the ultimate aim to get the citizens of the world to willingly avail themselves to be injected with an experimental mRNA genetic altering substance. Clearly, this goes against all the codes of the Nuremberg Code and the natural law, with only one, and there's basically now just only one conclusion, that the punitive defendants has committed crimes against humanity. The mass media was and still is the bullhorn that bombarded humanity with COVID-19 messaging. For argument's sake, they continuously say and stated, follow the signs. Do it for yourself in your community. Protect you, protect us, with the objective to mislead and keep the populace of the world misinformed from the true dangers of the COVID-19 vaccines. This was all part of the psychological abuse on the unsuspected populace. This messaging assaulted the psyche of the populace to comply with the defendant's narrative. The evidence led by Meredith Miller articulated in detail on how the defendants utilized the mass media to ensure only their poisonous COVID-19 narrative is perceived as the only true acceptable narrative. In her evidence, she explained why so many citizens in the world succumbed to the defendants' narrative. And according to her, this was possible as a direct consequence of cognitive dissonance as well as a phenomenon called the Stockholm Syndrome. With cognitive dissonance, the citizens who participated in the COVID-19 vaccine medical experiments perceived the defendants and their own governments and individual institutions that they will do no harm to them. In a matter of fact, whatever they proclaim, whatever they advise, it is in their own best interest. In a matter of fact, they only have the best interest at heart. For them, they cannot perceive a world reality without the defendants and the government's input to their lives. This then explain the psychological ploy enacted by the defendants to get people to vaccinate themselves, even if it is to their own detriment. The evidence led by Meredith Miller in respect to the Stockholm Syndrome painted a realistic picture and gave probable reasons on why the citizens in the world felt they have no other alternative but to get vaccinated in order to get back to normal. It is also evident that when one traces the development of the COVID-19 poisonous narrative by punitive defendant Dr. Fauci, it all started in lockstep with the following phrase: we only need 2 weeks to flatten the curve, which we all know that it was a big fat lie. That proverbial 2 weeks is now almost 3 years, counting to 4 years. It was then followed by, we have to vaccinate people because of the good efficacy rate of the vaccines in order to get and return to a sense of normality. Once again, a big fat lie. It turned out that the defendants here, specifically Dr. Fauci and Bill Gates, primed citizens to avail themselves for multiple booster shots, setting the stage for them and the pharmaceutical companies to rake in billions of dollars in revenue. This is a well-established fact that can easily be confirmed, and my learned colleague, Dr. Rainer Fulmig, had played a soundbite of where the punitive defendant Bill Gates openly, without even denying it, declared and confirmed that when it comes to vaccine, the return on investment is huge. The defendants achieved the diabolic objectives by deploying psychological methods to isolate people physically and psychologically through perceived acts of kindness. For example, as per the evidence of Meredith Miller, free vaccines, consumer incentives, etc. COVID-19 is life-threatening in that it poses a grave danger to public health and civilization as we know it. That's how they sold it. This led to people experiencing a perceived inability to escape the defendant's false, fraudulent, poisonous narrative, as they were placed in a state of hopelessness and a low state of consciousness. This state of hopelessness are predominantly reflected in the suicide statistics, which had gone up since the inception of the lockdowns. Here, we make reference to the evidence of Dr. Ariane Boulren, French clinical psychologist with particular interest in philosophy, psychopathology, in totalitarianism, harassment, and manipulation. With further evidence led by Professor Desmond, professor of clinical psychology, he described a psychotic state of mind that has been induced by the defendants and their co-conspirators in each and every country. For him, a psychotic state of mass formation were deployed to coax the populace to participate in the COVID-19 vaccine medical experiment. The targeted objective of mass formation is to split society into narrative believers and narrative non-believers. In this case, we of pro-vax or anti-vax groups. From this definition of mass formation, according to Professor Desmond, the fact speaks for itself. People who succumb to the COVID-19 mass formation psychosis incontrovertibly accepted the COVID-19 narrative as they were unable and currently are unable to keep a critical distance to see that narrative as absurd and illogical. They even go to the extent to willingly sacrifice everything that is important to them. They become intolerant to any dissonant voice by stigmatizing people who do not go with the narrative. And by so doing, they become cruel and justify their cruelty as an ethical duty to punish non-believers. And I believe, members of the jury, each and every one of you can identify to what I have just stated, specifically making reference then to Dr. Desmond's evidence. The people who has taken or subjected themselves to these poisonous vaccines see it as their ethical duty to be cruel. Dr. Ariane Bullrain's evidence expounded in detail why the defendants were able to cause a drift in society of non-believers and believers. According to evidence, the COVID-19 narrative squarely falls in the ambit of a totalitarian drift mode when viewed from a political, philosophical, and a psychopathology point of views. She described in the evidence it as a phenomenon that corresponds to a collective delusion of paranoia. Paranoia is a contagious psychosis whose masterpiece is harassment. With a goal-oriented approach, she stated that the defendants and those in power strip people from the individual sovereign identities for the collective common good of a group. And I believe this is where the dilemma basically exists. Am I going to do it to protect myself? But most importantly, I have to do it so that it is then for the common good. This is in direct conflict with natural law and constitutional law, where the focus are on the preservation of individual rights by providing guarantees that individual inalienable rights cannot be haphazardly compromised regardless of society's state of flux, i.e. a health crisis or any other societal crisis. With this said, the defendants and all their collaborators in each country must be indicted for their atrocities, for their crimes against humanity. The evidence is clear that the defendants blatantly and intentionally disregarded individual rights for their own nefarious ideals of population reduction. They saw individuals merely as objects in their deadly COVID-19 vaccine drives. Dr. Ariane Bullrain made the all-important point in her evidence that the defendants intentionally divided the world's populace into mere numbers. You are either a positive case or a negative case. She further corroborated multiple experts who testified and confirmed the mass media's role in the COVID-19 stress and anxiety debacle. In bringing evidence across to you, members of this jury, she highlighted psychological scientism, one of the methods also deployed as a predictive technique that never seems to move, as is caught up in a chameleon dimension that keeps the perpetrators in power. Thus, the discourse is no longer the experience. It is the experience that must come to the discourse. Dr. Fauci, Bill Gates, Dr. Tedros were on the forefront of this psychological scientism. The facts speaks for themselves. Follow the science. With the intentional implied intent that they are the science. They will not lie. You must just follow the science as it is for your own good. However, it is now an undeniable fact that many citizens, unfortunately, has been sacrificed on the dead psychological scientism altar. As already articulated, the success rate of the COVID-19 narrative could not have been attained if it was not for the media, mass formation, totalitarianism, the Stockholm Syndrome, and the cognitive dissonance of the populace, as well as the diligent and obedient assistance of the mass media. For their part, the mass media, we're talking about the board of directors, media corporate investors, producers, editors, journalists, must be held accountable for the many deaths due to their utter, unexplained, unethical behavior by allowing a continuous state of fear and anxiety, by withholding crucial medical and scientific data from the populace. Here we look at the evidence of Professor Crispin Miller, a New York University media professor, propaganda researcher, and lecturer, where he stated in his evidence that the media was, and currently still is, the main conveying vector of this false poisonous COVID-19 narrative. He further stated unequivocally that the COVID-19 catastrophe would never have been possible if it was not for the avid participation of nearly all the media worldwide. And once again, the fact speaks for itself. In his own words, he labors the point that the crisis is unprecedented as a blitzkrieg worldwide propaganda. In his expert opinion, he stated unequivocally and unambiguously that according to him, the media propagated and drove the COVID-19 disaster. The mass media dismally failed in their duties as arbiters to prevent government overreach and the deprivation of people's liberties. Thus, they failed to keep the government honest and the people well informed to take care of themselves and to protect their liberties. Thus, according to the evidence of Professor Crispin Miller. For him, the media is corrupted by advertisement revenue and corporate concentration. He, however, proffer an end to the propaganda in that it is the responsibility of all enlightened citizens to show the COVID-19 vaccine dead body count proliferation as an undeniable fact, for reason that it will make it impossible for any naysayer to deny the factual evidence as he stands. And as an example, he made reference to the Vietnam War and the body count of the Vietnam War that directly caused the end of the Vietnam War. In his evidence, he further highlighted imperative plan propaganda exercises where university research studies are undertaken intentionally on the most bizarre COVID-19 phenomena. Research papers are then churned out and the media use these research titles to sway public opinion from the most logical and profound explanation for the increase in the COVID-19 vaccine dead body counts post-vaccination. As part of his conclusionary opinion, he is of the stern view that the mass media's failure and or refusal to take due notice of various established facts that complicate the official poisonous narrative does not justify their failure, even if they know the vaccines are not safe. It is now a well-established, undeniable fact that the COVID-19 vaccines are not safe, and its continuous peddling as being safe in the mainstream media and respective governments worldwide is misleading and literal death traps culling the populace. This in itself shows clear intention that the defendants, mass media, and the world governments has perpetrated the biggest medical scientific lie of all ages. And without any doubt, members of the jury, this will go down in the annals of history as the biggest psychological warfare perpetrated on billions of people. I hereby now make reference to Professor Werner Beckholz. He is a engineer professor, but as part of his specialty in science and practice of quality risk management, where he postulated 11 conclusions why the COVID-19 vaccines must be halted with immediate effect. In essence, his evidence corroborated Dr. Mike Yeadon's evidence, former vice president of Pfizer, that stable mass production of the vaccines has not been achieved. And this is an undeniable fact. Here, once again, he stratifies in detail why, from a scientific risk management perspective, and I quote, non-conformities relating to the requirements of good manufacturing practices cannot provide any indemnification. In a matter of fact, for him, this indemnity clause are null and void ab initio. His evidence further corroborate Mrs. Dina McLeod's evidence from Canada. She has a degree in immunology and psychology. She stated in the evidence that the study was not designed to prove that COVID-19 vaccines can reduce asymptomatic disease, can reduce hospitalization or death, can reduce all cause of morbidity and mortality, are completely safe in the short or long term, and that it cannot stop transmission. However, let us not forget about the plethora of vaccine injuries and fatalities, the most fatalities for an experimental vaccine tested to date in human history. According to the USA VIIRS, within 1 year of the implementation of the vaccine injections, the death rate surpassed 50% of the vaccination deaths of all the other vaccines over a period of 30 years. This in itself is shocking. And this is the evidence that has been presented by Dr. Alexandra Herion-Koot, Director of Research in Genetics. The evidence is conclusive. Lockdowns caused more harm than any good, and the messaging provided by the defendants and their co-conspirators, collaborators in each country misguided the unsuspected public to take part in the medical COVID-19 vaccine experiment that caused more harm and death. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the dead body counts, and it still counts on a daily basis. And for that reason, the defendants must be held accountable, and they must face the full force of justice. In amplification of the evidence and the case against the punitive defendants, I hereby make reference to the Attorneys General of Missouri and Louisiana in the United States of America, who filed a suit in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Louisiana, Monroe Division. The attorneys general say the current U.S. administration and its officials, here they include Dr. Fauci, colluded with big tech companies, including Meta, Twitter, and YouTube, to censor truthful information about a range of issues, including the coronavirus, etc., under the guise of combating misinformation. In respect to the overwhelming evidence presented to you, members of the jury, it is our respectful submissions that the evidence presented is prima facie proof that all the punitive defendants in this model grand jury proceedings has committed the most heinous crimes of all times, and that the dead body count of their atrocities are piling up day by day. It is thus not a matter should you indict or not. Rather, it is given based on the evidence that you must indict each of the punitive defendants for reasons that they acted in concert to commit the biggest medical and scientific genocide crime spree in the history of the world. I thank you for availing yourself to ensure justice is served, and ultimately indictments will go against each and every of the punitive defendants. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney at Law Dexter Reinfeldt. I would now like to give the floor to Virginie de Requia, Attorney at Law in France. Please, go ahead.
Dear colleagues, thank you for your conclusions. Esteemed members of the grand jury, Your Honor, after hearing the testimonies from international experts and victims, I would like to share with you my conclusions, specifically concerning the COVID-19 experimental injections, mass campaign, and the concomitant violation of the right to life, with a brief philosophical introduction about discrimination and human dignity. All human beings are born and remain free and equal in dignity and rights. It confirms the superiority of human considerations over scientific ones. Only the acceptance of man as a human being in whom dignity and respect are a priority as inalienable attributes attached to each individual is ultimately recognized. Every human being has the right to decent treatment. Decency implies benevolence towards others, the willingness to adapt to the person of the other, to his needs. Dignity is the essence of man. To defend dignity or one's dignity would therefore be to defend humanity. This protection takes the form of a duty, the duty of the community to offer a dignified life to everyone, an essential duty. Legislation has attempted to define this dignified life, an independent life that allows for autonomy of choice and participation in social and cultural life. Now let us remember the definition of health. Health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. In the foundations of the metaphysics of morals, Sir Immanuel Kant distinguishes between what has a price and what has a dignity. In the reign of the ends, everything has a price or a dignity. What has a price can be replaced by something else, something equivalent. On the contrary, what is superior to any price, what consequently admits no equivalent, is what has dignity. Therefore, a society that chooses which human being deserves to be treated with dignity, and which does not would be an unjust, immoral society based on discrimination and exclusion. The human family would no longer be one. Brotherhood would be replaced by a hierarchy of dignities. At the bottom of society, men would survive treated as things. According to the Stoics, I cannot feel any disturbing strangeness in front of another man. Because he is a man must not be a stranger for a man. Cicero echoes Terence's lines, I am a man and nothing human is foreign to me. Consequently, any violence, any discrimination against people who refuse to be injected with an experimental substance, especially when the pharmaceutical product in question is ineffective and harmful or even deadly, violates all the principles attached to human dignity. Brief comments about mass manipulation to be inoculated with experimental pharmaceuticals. Following Dr. Billerand's statement, I quote, "Viruses are embedded in our DNA. We touch hundreds of millions of them every day." Curtis Suttle, a virologist at the University of British Columbia in Canada, says in 2018 study that more than 800 million viruses are deposited on every square meter of the Earth every day. In a tablespoon of seawater, there are more viruses than people in Europe. We swallow more than 1 billion viruses every time we go swimming. We are inundated with virus. A 2011 paper published in Nature Microbiology estimated that there are more than 1 quintillion viruses on Earth. About 8% of the human genome is viral in origin, and viruses have been around long before the human species on Earth, helping to give rise to cellular life. What kind of crazy idea is to achieve zero COVID? As Dr. Billerand confirms, the ideology denies the facts and manufactures them according to its goodwill and its prophetic realities. The masses follow it because the ideology reassures by its pseudo-explanatory and global character. The fiction becomes reality. In this regard, COVID-19 has an actual case fatality rate similar to that of seasonal influenza, according to the eminent Professor Jan Ioannidis. A report entitled "The COVID-19 Epidemic Had a Relatively Low Impact on Mortality in France" was prepared by French experts Laurent Tubiana, Laurent Mucchielli, Pierre Chaillot, and Jacques Bouot on the issue of excess mortality and made public on March 19, 2021. I quote, "The epidemic of coronavirus seems to be added to the list of the many viruses, including the seasonal common flu, causing severe respiratory pathologies. It does not differ fundamentally from the most severe episodes of seasonal influenza. Therefore, comparison with the medieval plague, cholera, of the Spanish flu, which have flourished in the public debate, are totally inappropriate." In November 2020, the renowned Dr. Hopkinson said, "The main thing is that there is a totally unfounded public hysteria fueled by the media and politicians. It is outrageous. It's the biggest hoax ever perpetrated on an unsuspecting public. COVID-19 is nothing more than a bad seasonal flu. It's not Ebola. It's not SARS. This is politics playing medicine, and it's a very dangerous game." In an article dated February 22, 2021, a French psychiatrist, Dr. Frédéric Badel, warns about mass manipulation. This evokes sectarian techniques and collective suicides. To escape the end of the world or the aliens, in this case a deadly virus, sacrifice is presented as a salvation. The reality buried under the daily discordant, guilt-inducing messages has given way to delirium in which logical links dissolve. About the true nature of the COVID-19 experimental injection. Many virologists and geneticists from various Western countries, having no particular interest in speaking out, tell us that the products currently on the market are not vaccines, but injectable gene substances. As such, the FDA legally qualified these products as gene therapy, innovative therapy, falling into the category of biological drugs and absolutely not into the category of vaccine. Moreover, these pharmaceutical products have received a conditional marketing authorization, being specified that they are in clinical trial period until 2023, 2024. They are therefore experimental products. Mr. Stefan Ulrich, president of the pharmaceutical division of the Bayer Group, expressed himself as follows at the World Health Summit held in Berlin from October 24 to 26, 2021, in front of 6,000 people, 120 countries, in front of international experts from the academic world, politicians, and the private sector. I quote, "The new COVID mRNA vaccines are actually cell and gene therapies that would have been rejected by the public without a pandemic and favorable marketing. We are really talking that leap to drive innovation. We, as a company Bayer, in cell and gene therapies. At the end of the day, mRNAs vaccines are an example of cell and gene therapies. I always like to say, if we had done a survey 2 years ago of the public, would you be willing to take a gene or cell therapy and inject it into your body? We probably would have had 95% refusal rate. Professor Mike Yeadon said during session 4 that although they have cleverly managed to disguise them under the word vaccine, the only thing they have in common with the traditional vaccine is the word. That's it. There is no other similarity. This is also confirmed by Professor Alexandra Orion-Côte in her expert report dated November 11, 2021. The term vaccine cannot be used in the conventional sense of the word in connection with what are identified as the COVID-19 vaccines of Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna, and AstraZeneca. Indeed, these are not vaccines, but experimental gene injection conditionally and temporarily authorized in connection with COVID-19. We are in an experimental research, a therapeutic trial, and not in a context of official validation of a pharmaceutical product. Here, in appropriately named vaccine, with respect to the user's understanding. Now, I would like to focus on a Nuremberg Code application in order for you to confirm or not if this mass injection campaign is a violation of the right to life, a violation of the principle of respect for the integrity of the human body. Prior to the Genocide Convention, the crime and the term received their first official legal consecration in the indictment of the accused before the International Military Tribunal of Nuremberg. The judgment by a War Crimes Tribunal at Nuremberg laid down 10 standards to which physicians must conform when carrying out experiments on human subjects in a new code that is now accepted worldwide. This judgment established a new standard of ethical medical behavior for the post-World War II human rights era. Amongst other requirements, this document enunciates the requirement of voluntary informed consent of the human subject. The principle of voluntary informed consent protects the right of the individual to control his own body. The historic power of Nuremberg was to consecrate a particular normative framework for human experimentation based on the idea that potential subjects are so vulnerable that their protection and that of humanity in these matters can only be ensured by imperative norms binding experimenters in the name of public order, and in this case, of international public order. This code also recognized that the risk must be weighed against the expected benefit and that unnecessary pain and suffering must be avoided. This code recognizes that doctors should avoid actions that injure human patients. Here is the code. The great weight of the evidence before us to effect that certain types of medical experiments on human beings, when kept within reasonably well-defined bounds, conform to the ethics of the medical profession generally. The protagonists of the practice of human experimentation justify their views on the basis that such experiments yield results for the good of society that are unprocurable by other methods or means of study. All agree, however, that certain basic principles must be observed in order to satisfy moral, ethical, and legal concepts. Standard 1, the voluntary concept of the human subject is absolutely essential. This means that the person involved should have legal capacity to give consent, should be so situated as to be able to exercise free power of choice without the intervention of any element of force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or other ulterior form of constraint or coercion, and should have sufficient knowledge and comprehension of the elements of the subject matter involved as to enable him to make an understanding and enlightened decision. This latter element requires that before the acceptance of an affirmative decision by the experimental subject, there should be made known to him the nature, duration, and purpose of the experiment, the method and means by which is to be conducted, all inconveniences and hazards reasonably to be expected, and the effects upon his health or person which may possibly come from his participation in the experiment. The duty and responsibility for ascertaining the quality of the consent rests upon each individual who initiates, directs, or engages in the experiment. It's a personal duty and responsibility which may not be delegated to another with impunity. Standard 2, the experiment should be such as to yield fruitful results for the good of society and procurable by other methods or means of study, and not random and unnecessary in nature. Standard 3, the experiment should be so designed and based on the results of animal experimentation and the knowledge of the natural history of the disease or other problem under study, that the anticipated results justify the performance of the experiment. Standard 4, the experiment should be so conducted as to avoid all unnecessary physical and mental suffering and injury. Standard 5, no experiment should be conducted where there is an a priori reason to believe that death or disabling injury will occur, except perhaps in those experiments where the experimental physicians also serve as subjects. Standard 6, the degree of risk to be taken should never exceed that determined by the humanitarian importance of the problem to be solved by the experiment. Standard 7, proper preparations should be made and adequate facilities provided to protect the experimental subject against even remote possibilities of injury, disability, or death. Standard 8, the experiment should be conducted only by scientifically qualified persons. The highest degree of skill and care should be required through all stages of the experiment of those who conduct or engage in the experiment. Standard 9, during the course of the experiment, the human subject should be at liberty to bring the experiment to an end if he has reached the physical or mental state where continuation of the experiment seems to him to be impossible. Standard 10, during the course of the experiment, the scientist in charge must be prepared to terminate the experiment at any stage if he has probable cause to believe in the exercise of the good faith, superior skill, careful judgment required of him, that a continuation of the experiment is likely to result in injury, disability, or death to the experimental subject. The testimonies of the international experts and victims demonstrated that the 10 standards of the Nuremberg Code were not respected at all during the implementation of the COVID-19 mass vaccination. Among the criteria determined to define the licit or illicit character of the experiment, regarding the subject of experimentation, in the jurisprudential construction of Nuremberg, the subject of the experiment is a role whose repertoire of action is a simple exercise of two faculties: the faculty to authorize or not to authorize the act that is proposed to be carried out on him, and even then he does not have the faculty to consent lightly, he is supposed to be obliged to make an enlightened decision. The faculty of withdrawing, of stopping the experiment on himself at any moment without condition and without sanction. The condition of quality of the subject is logically that he has the legal capacity to consent, which excludes, according to the Nuremberg criteria, experimentation on children and on all legally incapable persons. The consent of the subject for Nuremberg is the consent of a volunteer free to recuse himself at any time, not of a contractor who obliged himself. Consent here is in no way mobilized in the context of a creative exchange of rules of obligations, but as a condition sine qua non of the authorization given to the experimenter to attack the physical integrity of others for the reason of experimentation, such as this authorization is granted by the laws of humanity and the requirements of the public conscience, as much as by the general principles of the criminal law, such as they derive from the criminal laws of all civilized nations. Very important to keep in mind, consent, with its irrevocability, is the essential criterion for distinguishing from a criminal perspective between the victim and the subject. We asked Professor Henrion Code if the injected person were able to give free and informed consent to make an enlightened decision, to which the professor replied that this is not possible. About the experimenter, the Nuremberg judges are careful to base the lawfulness of their experiments not so much on dogmatic definitions as on pragmatic criteria of implementation, as everything being done by the experimenter to avoid actual or potential harmful consequences for the subjects of the experiment must be conducted in such a way as to avoid all unnecessary physical and mental suffering and injury. Specifically, provisions must be made and means provided to protect the experimental subject against even the slightest risk of injury, disability, or death. If some level of risk is permissible, it must be proportionate. The level of risk to be taken must never exceed that of the humanitarian importance of the problem to be solved by the experiment. The experimenters must be scientifically qualified persons. Their professional competence must be of the highest level and not only ordinary. Article 10 postulates a scientist capable of exercising the good faith and prudent judgment required of him honesty, good faith, prudence. It's really not what we have witnessed during the COVID-19 injection mass campaign. Concerning the experience themselves, the experiment must be such as to produce results advantageous to the good of society, impossible to obtain by other methods or means of study, or not too random and superfluous in nature. The economics of risk and reward prohibits putting human subjects at any risk if there are opportunities to do otherwise. Since the SARS-CoV-2 virus is equivalent to influenza and that there is more than 15 treatments available in prevention or for cure, which are with high level of evidence following the classical hierarchy of scientific evidence, with ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, steroids, antihistamines, fluvoxamine, colchicine, etc., vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc, artemisia, and more. There were no need to produce urgently and force experimental injections with new biotechnology. Dr. Shankara Chetty, during session 4, reminded us that the first work of a physician is to make a diagnosis and to analyze the symptomatology of his patient and not to ask for the result of an ineffective test. He treated his patients with a protocol of his own, hydroxychloroquine, steroids, and antihistamines, given his suspicion that the spike protein caused an allergy. And it worked. He even said that the experimental injection will prolong exposure to the pathogen, which is a spike protein, contained in large quantity in these pharmaceutical products. Dr. Brian Hardis asked, why don't you use ivermectin instead of remdesivir that causes damages and death, but still largely promoted by Dr. Fauci, also given to children now in the US. Dr. Hardis also spoke about midazolam, like we have in France, Rivotril, that caused a lot of deaths among the elderly, like witnessed John Holune, a funeral director in UK. We asked Professor Bagdi if the WHO, the public health agency, the producers of the experimental pharmaceuticals in concern, their contractors and their investors, have respected the 10 standards of the Nuremberg Code, to which the Professor Bagdi answered categorically no. Some more observations in detail. Regarding gene therapy injection, the precautionary principle has not been applied. The randomized studies that led to the conditional marketing authorization were all conducted by the manufacturer themselves. No independent studies for randomized clinical trial. The other real-life studies are almost all financed directly or indirectly by the pharmaceutical companies themselves. There have been no genotoxicity, carcinogenicity, teranogenicity studies, on the pretext that this is not for vaccines. However, these products are innovative therapies using nucleic acids never before used on healthy population. There is currently no or very limited data available, particularly for the Pfizer product, to support studies that will not yield results until December 2023. Anaphylaxis, safety events of interest, used during pregnancy, used in immunocompromised patients, used in frail patients with comorbidity, used in patients with autoimmune or inflammatory disorders, long-term safety data. To date, there has been no official verification of the exact composition of these experimental pharmaceuticals, despite strong suspicions often declared or prohibited exceptions, graphene oxide, ALC 315. Dr. Gatti said that she observed nanoparticles, nano-entities, no biocompatible, and certainly responsible of side effects in the COVID-19 experimental substances. Note that classified document from FDA concerning the experimental injection present the coding B4 corresponding to the disclosure of information that would hinder the application of advanced technology within an American armament system. Thousands of deaths and serious side effects are reported following the COVID-19 injection mass campaign. The WHO Global Drug Vigilance Database, say VGAccess, shows that in 1 year, the number of adverse event reports for COVID-19 pharmaceutical injection is 10.8 times higher than in 53 years for all flu vaccines. In 53 years of influenza vaccination, 267,000 reported records. Since the beginning of the COVID-19 vaccination campaign, Professor Onyankode said during session 4 that VGAccess database contains more than 3 million reported adverse events in February 2022. In addition, a confidential Pfizer report was obtained and published following a Freedom of Information procedure, which provides data on deaths and adverse events recorded by Pfizer from the start of the vaccination project in December 2020 until the end of February 2021, a very short period of time of less than 3 months. Pfizer's confidential report contains detailed evidence of the experimental injection's impact on mortality and morbidity, As of February 2021, Pfizer had already received more than 1,200 reports of deaths likely caused by the vaccine and tens of thousands of reported adverse events, including 23 cases of spontaneous abortion out of 2,270 pregnancies and more than 2,000 reports of heart problems. Many international experts have been warning us for months that these injections risk blocking all our immune defenses, which will put us in permanent danger. Notably, Professor Van der Busch, who had important responsibilities with the Pfizer and Novartis laboratories, Professor Mark Yeadon, ex-vice president of Pfizer, Professor Zugarit Bhatti, Professor Robert Malone, Professor Peter McCullough, who are warning us by advising us to immediately stop this so-called vaccination campaign. Indeed, it is exposed that these experimental pharmaceuticals cause an antibody-dependent enhancement phenomenon against the variants. The facilitation of infection by these experimental pharmaceuticals can lead people to develop more severe forms of the disease than if they were not vaccinated. With the booster doses, the phenomenon is accentuated and can make people more fragile. Indeed, if on the one hand we are witnessing an impressive number of immediate damaging effects, on the other hand, we have no insight concerning the long-term effects, notably those announced by several world-renowned virologists. While the American Federal Drug Agency was able to terminate a clinical trial following a single death, Dr. McCullough suggests that 25 to 50 deaths during a vaccine campaign are far enough to terminate a clinical trial, according to commonly accepted ethical rules. We have crossed these ethical boundaries even before these experimental products were put on the market. This is not acceptable. Moreover, these products are ineffective. In a study dated September 30, 2021, in the European Journal of Epidemiology, the authors find that the most vaccinated populations also have the most COVID-19 cases and vice versa. A meta-analysis published on July 14, 2021, demonstrated that natural human immunity to SARS-CoV-2 works against all variants. Another Tel Aviv University preprint study published in August 24, 2021, indicates that natural immunity would be about 13 times stronger than immunity achieved after receiving 2 doses of Pfizer-BioNTech injection. Finally, the immunologist Gilbert Claassen published in August 25, 2021, the result of his analysis of randomized clinical trials of Pfizer, Moderna, Janssen genetic vaccines. As other scientists have expressed, he concludes that after reanalyzing the data from these clinical trials, taking into consideration the all-cause morbidities in the vaccine versus placebo trial groups, then none of the vaccine provide a health benefit, and all pivotal trials show a statistically significant increase in severe all-cause morbidity in the vaccine group compared to the placebo group. Based on this data, I quote, "It's almost certain that mass vaccination with COVID-19 is harmful to the health of the general population. Scientific principles dictate that mass vaccination with COVID-19 vaccine must be stopped immediately because we are facing a vaccine-induced public health catastrophe. There are consequences on fertility." Moreover, still reading the report of Professor Alexandra Orion-Coade, and after having taken note of a video intervention, we note that there are very serious reasons to be concerned about the consequences of experimental genetic substances on the fertility of people of childbearing age, as well as for future generations. The data sheets for the 4 experimental pharmaceuticals indicate that no prior studies have been conducted to determine their potential harmful effects on pregnant women and fetus. Abuse of weakness and enticement of pregnant or nursing women to participate in a clinical trial. Gynecologists and other specialists around the world are seeing a very high number of miscarriage and disturbances in menstrual cycle in women who have received the experimental gene substance inoculation against SARS-CoV-2. Here is what Dr. James Aythorpe, MD, an obstetrician, gynecologist, and certified member of the Florida Board of Maternal and Fetal Medicine says in a letter dated January 12, 2022, to which he has attached the reference of 1,019 peer-reviewed scientific publications alerting the American Board of Obstetrics and Gynecology above. I quote, because it's very important. The threats you have circulated to all your specialists and subspecialists have resulted in pushing experimental gene therapy injection into all women of childbearing age and pregnant women with extremely serious consequences. Numerous independent sources worldwide have observed a significant increase in miscarriage, fetal death, fetal malformations, severe placenta inflammation, severe UGR, neonatal death, infant death, permanent chronic autoimmune diseases of the newborn child, permanent immune deficiency syndrome, permanent chronic CNS disease, chronic cognitive impairment, disabilities, seizure disorder, and the onset of neonatal infant cancers and opportunistic infections, as well as many other disastrous consequences. Please understand and acknowledge that it is not my responsibility to prove this to a board or anyone else. Rather, it was a responsibility of those recommending this extremely dangerous experimental gene therapy to show safety data before offering it to pregnant women. Animal studies clearly demonstrate that lipid nanoparticles with their mRNA loading cross all God-made barriers, including the blood-brain barrier, the placental barrier, the fetal blood-brain barrier. It's also known that there is a very high concentration of lipid nanoparticles in the ovaries of the mother, the fetus, and the newborn. As you know, a female fetus is born with all of its gametes, approximately 1 million eggs, in the ovaries, and each is exposed to these potentially toxic lipid nanoparticles. It is now widely known and understood that the vaccine, which is in fact an experimental gene therapy, works by inducing inflammation. Inflammation in developing embryo and fetus is a hallmark of permanent damage, malformations, death, placental insufficiency, and potentially permanent chronic disease in the offspring, including severe immunological disruption and disruption of TOL7, TOL8 receptors on cell membranes. Disruption of TOL7, TOL8 receptor is responsible for immune surveillance and suppression of cancer and opportunistic infections in the body, including herpes, shingles, CMV, HPV, tuberculosis, toxoplasmosis, and many others. Professor Sucharit Bhakdi has said the same during the session. Dr. Ryan Cole, a leading pathologist, has seen a striking increase in extremely rare cancers in newborns and infants. Now, planned measures intended to prevent birth are considered as an act allowing the qualification of genocide. In an article dated April 14, 1945, entitled Genocide, a Modern Crime, Raphael Lemkin, which is a lawyer that has invented the term genocide, lists the following among others. This aggression constitutes a serious threat to life, liberty, health, or economical survival, or to all of these factors combined. The perpetrators may be representatives of the state or of organized political or social groups. Responsibility will have to rest with the individuals both of those who give the orders and those who carry them out. The guilty party will not be able to argue in his defense that he acted in accordance with the laws of his country, since the genocide must be declared contrary to international law and morality. In a 1947 article entitled Genocide as a Crime Under International Law, Raphael Lemkin includes in the definition of genocide not only mass murder, but also forced birth control, abortions, sterilization, as well as devices that seriously endanger life and health. There's also a question of modification of the human genome. Following the report dated November 10 of 2021, written by Professor Alexandre Arnaud-Côte, I quote, "Beyond safety, what is the ethical risk involved in the administration of recombinant DNA or exogenous RNA? What are the ethical risks of genome modification and their transmission following the administration of artificially synthesized RNA as well as recombinant DNA? Is genome modification a scenario that has been considered and discussed? Is the heritability of this modification anticipated, understood, and desired? These questions are all the more important in countries where the Oviedo Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Dignity of the Human Being with regard to the application of biology and medicine was ratified in 1997. This convention aimed at preventing the possible abuses of all genetic engineering techniques. Indeed, the introduction of non-natural sequences into the human genome, and therefore not chosen by nature, as it is the case with these mRNA vaccines, and the use of GMO vaccine could expose humanity to unpredictable and disastrous risks. This brings us back to Raphael Lemkin's analysis, since he insisted on the irreducible biological nature of genocide as aiming at the physical degradation or even destruction of the population involved. He was firmly convinced that genocide was a matter of natural law and that it was fundamentally no different from homicide. As in the case of homicide, it is a right to existence, the natural right of individuals, which is at issue. To make genocide a crime is to proclaim the principle of the natural right to existence of every national, racial, and religious group. He added that the actuality of the partial or total destruction of the group is not necessary to conclude that genocide exists. It is sufficient that one of the acts enumerated in the definition be perpetrated with specific intent. Regarding the solution provided by the judges in the Nuremberg Code trial, throughout the so-called Nuremberg trial, the defense of the perpetrators relies on the following main points. In a totalitarian state, in time of war, there is no personal responsibility. It is a necessity of the state that substitutes itself for the individual will, and there is no consent that is worthwhile, neither of the experimenting doctors nor of the subjects. In these circumstances, the interest of science in the service of the defense of the nation takes precedence over that of the individual. Is this not what we are currently witnessing? During Nuremberg trial, judges gradually became aware of the inadequacy of the normative material provided by the Hippocratic Oath to settle the debates on the universalism of the rules of medical morality. They say, clearly, all these experiments involving brutality, torture, disabling injuries, and death were conducted in complete disregard of international conventions, the laws and customs of war, the general principles of criminal law as derived from the criminal laws of all civilized nations and control council. Clearly, human experimentation under such conditions, contrary to the principles of the law of nation, as they result from the established usages of civilized nations, the laws of humanity, and the dictates of public conscience. Concerning the defendants, my last observations. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation finances the WHO, the World Economic Forum, the Vaccine Alliance, Gavi, which promotes vaccine in the world, and Mr. Gates makes a considerable fortune with vaccine, and we have seen that in the video, much more than with Microsoft, as he said publicly. We asked Professor Macchiadon if it could be simple mistakes from the vaccine manufacturers. Professor Macchiadon responded that, I quote, the 4 major companies that came up with these gene vaccines all 4 decided to pick the most inappropriate parts of the virus to make a vaccine. So how could these 4 companies independently, unless they were colluding, make exactly the same mistakes? Well, no, they couldn't. They would have corrected each other and surely would have come up with several different designs. If you can be first in class or clearly stand out from the competition, you usually give up the fight or do something different. But no, all 4 of them presented a poorly designed product and made the same mistakes. By the way, if you start a new program, the probability of ever being on the market is a fraction of 1%. This is called the attrition rate. As programs move from their creative phase to their development phase, the probability of them reaching the market is very low. What is the probability that all 4 scientists could have succeeded at the same time? I would say that it can be shown mathematically to be infinitesimally small. So they didn't do any of the things they said they did. Therefore, I'm afraid there is a conspiracy, a collusion between the pharmaceutical companies, the regulators, and the people allowing them so to go ahead. So no, it can't be a mistake. About the COVID-19 experimental pharmaceuticals, Rochelle Walensky, director of the US Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, said during an interview on March 66, 2022, so many of us wanted them to be useful. Perhaps we were too cautious and too optimistic. We also recall that the head of Pfizer, main producer of the sales of COVID-19 experimental injection, Mr. Albert Bourla, obtained a veterinary degree and completed a doctorate in reproductive biotechnology. This executive does not care about the devastating consequences of the products he puts on the market and does not hesitate to make misleading and manipulative statements. Nothing surprising from the head of a multi-recidivist multinational. Indeed, we see many facts of corruption of doctors and government officials, as well as facts of false advertising, which is corroborated by press articles concerning Pfizer. For example, since 1995, Pfizer Inc. has had to pay $6.6 billion as a result of 42 lawsuits. 6 cases are currently pending. Albert Bourla, Pfizer, said during an interview dated March 12, 2022, this type of pharmaceutical product was not Pfizer's specialty, but they said it had to be done. They said it had to be done. This sentence said it all. I hope that this observation will help you form an opinion regarding the responsibility of the alleged defendants. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my conclusions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Attorney at Law Virginie Darougeau-Recchia. I would now like to give the floor to Michael Swinwood, Attorney at Law in Canada.
Thank you very much, Virginie. Thank you for all of the presenters here who have presented such an overwhelming dissertation on the overwhelming evidence that speaks to hoax. And how do you spell hoax? Ladies and gentlemen of this jury, you spell hoax CORONAVIRUS. From the very inception of coronavirus, there has been nothing but lies, manipulation, and propaganda, all designed to bring humanity under the cloak of the secrecy of the elite, who have in essence brought crimes against humanity into our lives. I want to speak today somewhat about eugenics and genocide, but I want to give you some context as to why I may have some insight into both issues. For the last 25 years in Canada, I have been acting on behalf of Indigenous people. And when we began our work with Indigenous people, we asked ourselves the question, how did this happen? About this degradation, this dissemination, this absolute destruction. My colleague Virginie mentioned Raphael Lemkin, and Raphael Lemkin was very responsible for putting forward the issues regarding genocide. The word itself comes from the combination of two words, genus and sede. Genus is race and sede is murder. So the murder of a race is defined by virtue of the Genocide Convention of the United Nations as follows. It contains 5 components: outright killing of a race, imposing conditions of life on a group designed to exterminate the group. And listen to this one: imposing conditions of life designed to cause mental or physical harm, sterilization, and transferring group of children from one group to another group, as we witnessed in Canada in the residential school catastrophe. Imposing conditions of life designed to cause mental or physical harm equals the hoax known as coronavirus. What has happened under the regime of the WHO and the World Economic Forum and the combination of BlackRock, Wellcome Trust, Bill Gates Foundation, all of these characters that we're speaking of, they're putative defendants here, but if we really examine them, they're real bad characters. And what they have in mind is something that was commenced a long time ago. And it's important to have some view of history in order to understand the why. Why is this happening? What could possibly be in the minds of human beings when they perpetrate such a crime against humanity, knowing full well that what they are talking about is manufactured? The virus is manufactured. The PCR test is manufactured. The vaccination, which is not a vaccination, but a gene therapy experiment, well defined in their own securities filings in the United States, gene therapy experiment. It is not a vaccination. But on all 3 fronts, the virus, the testing, the vaccination, what we have are lies. First and foremost, the virus has never been isolated or purified. Nowhere in the world has this virus been isolated or purified. The person who invented the PCR test says it's useless. All of the scientific evidence in relation to the PCR test demonstrates it is absolutely of no value in assessment of having coronavirus. And then finally, when was the last time you went to the doctor and he put a needle in your arm and didn't tell you what was in it? Because he couldn't tell you what was in it, because he doesn't want to tell you what is in it. And so it is left to humanity to come to some conclusions in relation to it. This coronavirus committee that has been headed by Dr. Rainer Fulmich and all of the lawyers that you have seen here today and all of the people who have participated in it are doing this from the perspective that somewhere, someone must speak the truth. What is being told to you are abject lies and manipulations. If you want to know a little bit of why we're in the situation we're in, I'm going to take you back to 1215. I'm going to take you back to 1215 because at that time, the King of England had been excommunicated from the Roman Catholic Church. And in order for him to not be in what he considered to be a terrible situation that would find him going to hell, he crawled back to the Pope and said, "What is it that I can do that will bring us back into the church?" And the Pope said, "You give me an oath of fealty in perpetuity, and I will let you back in." And so the oath of fealty of 1215 of King John I to the Pope of Rome was as follows. I, King John I, hereby give up the sovereignty of United Kingdom, Great Britain and Ireland in perpetuity, binding my heirs and successors. Well, today, the Queen of England, Elizabeth II, actually from the house of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha from Germany, not English, but from Germany, must report to the Pope on an annual basis. Now, there are two societies that were formed that come into this story that we're talking about, that is today, the coronavirus hoax. In 1344, the King of England decided to put together something that would allow him to be protected by the barons, the land barons, the dukes, etc. And so he formed what's called the Order of the Garter, of which most people don't know much about. But it is the biggest Freemason organization in the world, and it is headed by Queen Elizabeth II, who, by the way, reports to the Pope in Rome. Well, the Order of the Garter has been in existence since 1344, and this June the 21st, I believe, you will see a celebration of the Order of the Garter as it continues in its nefariousness and colonialism that has been the experience of Great Britain for a very long time. Ask India, ask Australia, ask New Zealand, ask Canada, and so on. Tyranny is a word that the elite absolutely love, because tyranny is the expression of control and domination. If I was to give a quick political science course to you members of the jury, I could take 3 board games and pretty quickly describe to you how the world is run. I could take the game of Monopoly, I could take the game of chess, and I could take the game of Risk. And you will see that the Monopoly is the banking system, and you will see that the chess game is the kings and queens and the pawns and the bishops and all of those things and exactly how it runs. And of course, the game of Risk is the game of war. And newsflash, you are in the Third World War, and it's biological, and it began in Wuhan, and it made its way throughout the world. And you have been subjected to tyrannical protocols for the purposes of control and domination and brainwashing, to bring you into a narrative that somehow denies what science is saying. And science is saying COVID-19 is a hoax. COVID-19 is a hoax. They say that when they wish to torture a prisoner of war, and what they do when they torture a person is they apply pressure and they apply pressure and they apply pressure, and then they take it off a little bit and the person feels relaxed, and then it's over, and then they double down And that's what's happened to humanity for the last 3 years. Unfortunately, it looks like it's going to continue to happen as we are now being told about monkeypox. Now, isn't it interesting that the mainstream media just recently reported on the coincidence between Event 201, when Bill Gates did a simulation of COVID-19 and did the whole planning, and the most recent 2021 report of the Munich Health Conference, which was together with the Bill Gates Foundation and Gavi and all of the usual characters, are there simulating in 2021, that was last year, 2021, they are simulating monkeypox. Oh, and in the timeline section of that document, May 15th, 2022 was identified in that document as the discovery of monkeypox for the first time in the world. Oh, and lo and behold, on May 5th, 2022, the world woke up to the discovery of monkeypox. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it is incumbent upon you to bring forward an indictment in relation to these characters who have a view of life that is very harmful to you. Back to the organizations, the Order of the Garter. In 1544, Ignatius of Loyola formed the Jesuits. The Jesuits have had their hand in world politics over the centuries since that time, 1544. There is a book written by John Eric Phelps. It is entitled The Vatican Assassins, the Army of the Pope. And it chronicles every 100 years of the Jesuits' activity in politics throughout the world. I can tell you that isn't a coincidence that the Pope today is a Jesuit, that Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, grew up in a Jesuit atmosphere and certainly well trained by the Jesuits. And the bureaucrats presently that are operating for the elites come out of the Order of the Garter and the Jesuits. And so really we have a triumvirate in relation to what you might call the conspiracy, because the Queen of England reports to the Pope of Rome, and both of them are tied in to Washington District of Columbia, which, by the way, is not a state, but it's the District of Columbia, apart from the United States, and surrounded the fence around the White House has a fleur-de-lis on the top of each spike of that fence. It was formed by the Town of Washington Act of 1870, which combined the city of Washington with the District of Georgetown. And the District of Georgetown is the Jesuit headquarters in the United States. And so people might say, well, that's a conspiracy theory. And I would say to them, no, it's a conspiracy analysis. Because what we've had for such a long time is a conspiracy to control humanity. You just have to look at the historical facts in relation to the colonialism of Britain, in relation to the colonialism of all sorts of royalty, where royalty comes along. When we're talking about the indigenous people of North and South America, in 1493, the King of Spain sent his emissary, Cortez, to read to them a requirement. And the requirement was as follows: I am here on behalf of the King of the land, who is the King of Spain, and the King of the universe, who is the Pope. And we will have someone come through with a book that will teach you a religion. And should you accept it, we will grant you privileges and exemptions. Should you tarry in your decision, will kill you and all your family, all your children, all your grandparents, everyone. 1 year or 2 years after that reading, 8 million Taino Indians were exterminated. That is genocide. Unfortunately, it spread from South America into the United States and into Canada. It's unusual, isn't it, that one of the degradations of the indigenous people in North America was infected blankets. Infected blankets. I wonder who had that idea. Oh, the Jesuits were giving them infected blankets. So where is the seed? Where is the seed of consciousness, of genocide? Where does it come from? Where does it come from? Well, let's talk a minute about eugenics. Now, eugenics is essentially a depopulation strategy. It is sold as being, oh, we just wish to deal with the genetics so that we can have a better human being. But if you go back in history and you look at the formation of eugenics, it happened way before the Second World War and Hitler. And oh my goodness, it was the Rockefeller Foundation in 1916 that was instrumental in founding the Eugenics Society in the United States with, William Gates Sr. William Gates Sr., a eugenist. Oh, I wonder what kind of dinner conversation did little Bill Gates Jr. listen to? Oh, and now today, Bill Gates Jr. is leading the parade on eugenics. He won't talk about it that way, but you look at the evidence and you will see that this is what's happening. Reiner at the beginning mentioned Julian Huxley. And Julian Huxley's very first paper, in fact, to UNESCO, United Nations Education, Scientific, and Cultural Committee. And in that paper, he basically said that eugenics has been something that psychologically and philosophically has been unthinkable. However, the time has come for this to happen. And so what we should understand is that the seeds of eugenics and genocide have been with us a long, long time. And now we have arrived at a place where, unbeknownst to most of humanity, there is a plan, an agenda that is being perpetrated on humanity, and it is only benefiting a very few. Why would that be? What is it about ourselves that we cannot come to conscious decisions about what is happening to us? Is it because we have become so brainwashed by the propaganda that has been thrown at us that we no longer can see reality? Contemplate just for a moment the First World War and the Spanish flu. And if you looked at the facts very carefully, you will come to realize that the elite were responsible for the Spanish flu and the First World War. A combination of Anglo-American elites who brought about those catastrophes. And then the Second World War came along, again supported by the same cabal as are supporting the coronavirus hoax. There are 4 states in the United States that are not states. They are commonwealths: Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, and Virginia. Now, the Commonwealth of Virginia You can go right now and look at their website, and in the top right-hand corner, you will see a symbol. And the symbol is a woman in a Roman toga, standing with her foot on top of a woman who's lying prone on the ground. And the motto under the symbol is Sic Semper Tyrannis, thus always tyranny, the Commonwealth of Virginia. And this has to go back to the 1600s that this was first put forward. And when John Wilkes Booth shot Abraham Lincoln, he yelled, Sic Semper Tyrannis, thus always tyranny. And I'm sure someone shouted it when they shot bullets in the front and the back of John Kennedy's head. And I'm sure that they used the script that they're using now to hoodwink people into thinking that the World Trade Center actually was perpetrated by Saudi Arabians, when it's very obvious that it was an inside job. And if we remember back then, we had architects and engineers, professional people who came together independently of the official World Trade Center report and told them straight up, it's a lie. You're lying. And so contemplate just for a moment, to string these matters together just for a moment. 1215 is not in the past. 1215 is here now. It is when the Pope said, I'm running this, not you. And that's essentially what we're doing presently, is we're under the thumb. We're under the rule of Sic Semper Tyrannis, thus always tyranny. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've heard overwhelming evidence throughout this coronavirus. You have heard overwhelming evidence from scientists, doctors, virologists, immunologists, who have told you this is a hoax. And the only way that we can counter what this is to tell the truth. And it takes courage for people to tell the truth. We're asking you, step up, and bring these people to the international forum. Bring these people to the international disgust that should be thrown their way. The most important thing for humanity is to come to the realization that our awareness has been tampered with, that our reality has been tampered with. To some extent, there is a spiritual dimension to all of this that cannot be ignored. The reason that there's a spiritual dimension to all of this is because we're coming to the probably a climatic point where the dark force and the light force meet. And unfortunately, where all of these seeds of genocide and eugenics and the consciousness of genocide and eugenics comes from is a very harmful place for most of humanity. And part of our problem is that our foundations are not based on our relationship to spirit. We have taken spirit out of the equation. We've taken the soul out of the equation, and we have made it into some kind of a material definition of how life is. There's two choices to humanity at this moment in time. They can go down the path on the left-hand side with the apocalypse, which is what the elite are seeking to promote, or they can go down the right-hand path to the awakening, to come to the realization of the divine power that exists within every human being, and to come to the realization of how to call upon that divine power to assist us in this absolute moment of crisis that exists wide. The only thing that allows the elites to be where they are is because we worship money. And because of that, we find ourselves in a situation where we can be easily controlled. Fear is, the acronym for fear is false evidence appearing real. That is the definition of coronavirus. False evidence appearing real. And the antidote to fear is love. And so humanity must come to the realization that every vibration that is being pounded at them is being pounded on the basis of fear. It's certainly not based on love. This is a momentous time. And in this momentous time, we must come to the realization that our inner courage and inner strength must come forward. We shall not, we cannot, we will not allow this hoax to continue. I implore you, I beg of you, act and bring these fools to justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney at Law Michael Swinwood. I would now like to give the floor to Attorney at Law Amy Garner from the United States of America.
Thank you very much, Vivian. And thank you, my esteemed colleagues, for all of your wonderful summaries and presentations of the evidence. And mostly I want to thank the Court of Public Opinion, those of you who have been watching this enactment of a grand jury. And we have to tell you that the experts who came forward, the doctors, the scientists, the researchers, the economists, every one of them put themselves at risk to do this. Even some of the lawyers involved in this put themselves at risk to do this enactment. It's not easy telling the truth these days. It's not welcome if it's against the state narrative. We are living in a very dystopian Orwellian society where up is down, safe and effective is dangerous and lethal. Vaccines are not meant to prevent a disease, but rather to introduce a foreign substance into your body that will now manipulate your own genetics into creating a toxin in your own body, after which your body sets up a defense mechanism to fight it, something that it's producing. This whole dystopian nightmare is an upside down world for all of us, where many of us have been cajoled, coerced, intimidated, and certainly lied to about what has been really going on. I want to just focus on a couple of things that were significant to me in the evidence that came forward throughout this presentation. And that is that we have evidence of the deliberateness of this planning and as well as the deception. And what I want to focus on for a few minutes is the changing of vocabulary that occurred that gave them the momentum and gave the talking heads, the quote, authoritative, trusted news outlets, the similar vocabulary that repeated often enough sounded as if it were true. And we have to be very aware of the trickery that's gone on with the languaging that has been promoted during this entire event. I will not dignify it by calling it a pandemic. That was the first adulteration of a word that occurred here in the Corona-19 world that we now live in. So the word pandemic was one that had been adopted by the World Health Organization, which, by the way, is a sub-agency of the United Nations. This will become significant in just a few moments. But the World Health Organization decided to change the definition of pandemic. Pandemic used to mean a severe life-threatening disease that had achieved wide geographical dispersion. Now, they eliminated the words concerning serious illness and disease so that what was needed now was merely a wide geographical dispersion of a disease. They also introduced the concept of a novel disease. Well, we know from our experts and we know from the research that coronavirus was not novel at all, if it even does exist. We're not quite sure if it's just snippets of genetic material that were computer generated, or if it is a snippet of some real virus that used to exist and then was manipulated to include other types of viruses. There's a lot of discussion about that, but it's not critical except to know that it is a man-made disease, and that is significant. And it appears to have been man-made in Wuhan labs, which was funded by Anthony Fauci's group, National Allergy and Infectious Disease Institute. So we have the changing of the definition, first and foremost, of the word pandemic. The reason that was significant is because it allowed the World Health Organization to then declare a public health emergency of international concern, which, as Dr. Fulmick said earlier, the acronym for that is pronounced FAKE. Once the World Health Organization had the wherewithal to declare the FAKE, then countries and states in the United States followed suit and declared their own public health emergency. This allowed a lot of power to be transferred from the legislative branch to the executive branch. And in some of the states where it's especially oppressive and tyrannical, the three branches of government in America have collapsed into one branch, that of the executive department. Thomas Jefferson said a long time ago that that was the very definition of tyranny, when one person or one department basically has all of the powers of the three branches, which are supposed to be the checks and balances of our liberties, our God-given liberties and those that came through the Constitution, the natural law that we're all entitled to. So the pandemic was that was the first casualty of the language. The second casualty was that of, let me just take a quick look at my notes, but was that of COVID cases. So what exactly is a case? Well, if you go on your own Department of Health, your state Department of Health website, it never defines a case because they don't really want you to know what a case is. So what happened is that CDC first, before even the PCR test, basically created a new definition of case. The PCR test, as made by Drosten, made sure that we all got a lot of fear around someone who had a case. Well, never before in medical history has a case meant anything other than somebody who actually is sick. A case is somebody who's sick, has symptoms, may be contagious. No, in this case, a case is a positive PCR test. You don't have to have any symptoms because they also created a new word for a healthy person. That new word for a healthy person is an asymptomatic carrier or asymptomatic person who then has the possibility of transmitting some terrible disease to you, even though they have to get a PCR test to see if they're even sick, right? They're not sick, they're healthy. So they've twisted the language in a way to be very tricky and to promote a lot of fear and psychological anxiety. So we have the original definition of pandemic. We have a case, which was devised from a fake test that its inventor, Kary Mullis, said was never designed to diagnose anything and was not intended to determine if somebody was infectious or not. It was primarily used to amplify, this test was used to amplify minute amounts of RNA or DNA, and primarily used in forensic criminal applications, not in diagnostics. So we have a PCR test that's being misused to create a large amount of fear. And now that moves towards defining what a case is. That then we see the case numbers every day on the television or in the Department of Health statistics for every state and for every country. Oh, there were 1,000 new cases today. No, we have a 90% false positive rate because they're testing healthy people. And that especially will drive up the numbers. The way that they're using the test in terms of its numbers of amplification, doubling of each cycle, will also drive up the false positive numbers. The studies abound about that. There's no question that the people involved in this particular scam and hoax knew that the PCR test would not determine anything about sickness. But what it did was program and cause fear in enough people so that they believed they would need whatever solution the government would offer to a crisis it created. We also have COVID deaths. Now, the CDC in March of 2020 redefined how one type of death was going to be reported, and that was COVID-19. In their redefinition of their manual, and just in this one disease, which had been, the manual had been out for, I believe, about 17 years, and they decided to change one single disease on its reporting, and that would be now anyone who died with a positive test. Doesn't matter that the presenting illness or injury was trauma-based. For example, domestic violence. Many coroners have reported domestic violence, but they had a positive COVID, positive PCR test, so that was counted as a COVID death. Motorcycle accidents, gunshot wounds. These are things that started getting counted as basically COVID deaths. And what happened is that anything that could be categorized as a COVID death was. So the death counts then were used to promote fear and anxiety amongst people. All they did was just change the languaging. They changed definitions. And by that, they created this program of a military level psyops of terrorizing us all into wanting a solution. And what was the solution? Of course, it was the shots. That was another change in definitions. Before COVID, a vaccination was something that contained a part of a live virus or a weakened virus that, when injected into your body, would cause your body to mount a defense against it. No, now what they have is a shot that they call in their own, as Mr. Swinwood mentioned, they call it experimental gene therapy. That's in Moderna's own Securities and Exchange Commission filings of what they call it. The reason they started calling it a vaccine rather than experimental gene therapy is because they knew that the public would be quite hesitant to allow themselves and their children and their grandparents and parents to be injected with a DNA modifying agent. Makes sense. So they had to change that definition as well. So we have these tricky word games they have played on us, but that was intentional. The times of these changes, the WHO changed its definition of pandemic just before declaring the public health emergency, and at a time that many countries had already cut generous, profitable contracts with Pfizer and other manufacturers. They changed the definition. The CDC was in March of 2020. The definition of case was never defined to any of us, but we knew what it was because of just the positive PCR test. There was no other criteria, no clinical correlation, no symptoms necessary. This shows a deliberate and intentional, basically criminal collaboration that went on a global scale. And we can't ignore this. George Orwell predicted it, and we are living it right now. The United Nations, the reason I mentioned that is because the United Nations passed a resolution called Agenda 21 several years ago, and recently Agenda 2030. Agenda 21's primary goal is to create, quote, sustainability, another one of those words that's been bastardized by people who want to control us. Sustainability, in their eyes, means reduction of the human population by 90% or more. This goal was proposed to be achieved by 2030. First, it was proposed to be achieved in the Agenda 21 was 21st century. And then it was clarified more in the Agenda 2030. We can see that what has happened in the last, now going on 3 years, has been an intentional depopulation agenda. That is through the administration of the so-called vaccines, the experimental shots that have been administered previously to first responders, to our military. It's been mandated by states that wanted all of their state employees to have it. It's been mandated by teachers, for teachers. It has been mandated for people who want a job in certain sectors of the economy. And what has happened is that this is one of the biggest experiments on human beings that has happened in history. Pfizer went into their trials without adequate testing, without adequate animal testing, and without testing anyone other than extremely healthy people as against the control group. And the control group were also healthy people. The control group received placebos. The quote, first human experimental subjects received some version of an mRNA vaccine or shot. Now, whether that mRNA was the actual mRNA that was injected and in the vials of Pfizer and Moderna later is another question, and that's a deeper subject. But some type of mRNA was injected into the volunteers who started this particular trial. Pfizer intentionally destroyed any possibility of long-term studies of the effects of these shots by subsequently, about 6 months later, offering the people who had gotten the saline injections, the placebos, offering them the shot. So now we have no long-term studies on the adverse consequences, at least until all of the people started accepting these experimental drugs into their bodies. And doctors were hawking these drugs like drug dealers on a street corner in a busy city. They were now pushing these drugs, medical intervention, experimental medical intervention, pushing these drugs for pregnant women and for children. That is absurd. You don't experiment on fetuses, the unborn. You don't experiment on children who cannot give consent. And as it turns out, nobody could give informed consent because there is not enough information about it that we knew. Now with the Pfizer dump that has been ordered by a federal court and the review of various documents, we're seeing admissions by Pfizer that they knew, they had actual knowledge that this was dangerous in pregnancy. They had actual knowledge that children who have a statistically zero chance of dying from the disease have a greater chance of dying from the injections. Why would anyone give it to their child knowing that? Well, it's been hidden from people. We have all been deceived and lied to, and it's only because of courageous scientists and doctors and researchers who've come out, especially during this enactment, that we have been able to uncover some of that truth and be able to convey it to you, the court of public opinion. We so appreciate your attention during this. And we feel that we have clearly shown the evidence that shows a premeditated, decades-old premeditated plan to commit eugenics, a euphemism for genocide. And how did they do that? Because these shots kill a huge number of people and maim a huger number of people, a larger number of people because of their effects. And they knew this. Pfizer had something like 19 pages of a single-spaced document showing all of its adverse effects, starting with the first one, a deletion of a gene that normally only occurs in congenital abnormalities, and going through, of course, all of the heart problems that we've become aware of with athletes falling over on the field, young men dying, pilots having a heart attack soon after landing their planes and soon after they've had the jab. So we know now it's starting to come out. The narrative is falling apart. That's the good news. But we have to hold these people liable and responsible. This has been an intentional criminal conspiracy to damage and weaken not only the military of the United States, but our first responders, our teachers, our parents, our students, especially our young people. And that has been the most horrific part of this crimes against humanity, has been the experimentation on our children and the unborn. That should make every parent want to rise up and say, no more. I will not allow myself or my family to be injected with experimental devices or shots. So what we have shown, of course, is the very basis of this lie being the PCR test. That's been thoroughly discussed, and I won't go into that again. We know about the lie about 2 weeks to flatten the curve. We were told that lie, but we thought, well, 2 weeks, it would be okay. I'd go along with 2 weeks of social isolation, staying at home, working from home, having my children home from school to get over this, whatever disease it is, because none of us knew how serious or not serious it was at the beginning. It's about the same as the equivalent of a seasonal flu, as one of my colleagues mentioned. What also happened is that Fauci recommended dangerous protocols to hospitals that ensured that if you did go in with a COVID diagnosis, you were admitted to the hospital with a COVID diagnosis, they would treat you in such a way that would almost guarantee that you would not leave the hospital except feet first. They started Fauci recommended remdesivir as the standard of care based on 2 studies that had been done, both of which were done under conflicts of interest. The first one was funded by National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease. The second one was funded by Gilead, who is the actual manufacturer of remdesivir. So Dr. Fauci, because everybody loves Dr. Fauci for some reason, and he is the doctor who can recommend things, and people say, oh, Dr. Fauci said this, Dr. Fauci said that. Well, he recommended this based on 2 studies, both of which showed very high levels of death as a result of using remdesivir. The first study was a 28-day study, and the death rate was in excess of 50%. The second study was only a 10-day study because I guess they figured if a 28-day study would kill 50%, maybe a 10-day study would have fewer deaths and we could have some justification. Well, this study showed about a 30% death rate on Gilead's study. This is unacceptable. The number of deaths, as my colleague Virginie talked about, that the number of deaths in prior experimental shots that came out, after reaching just 50 deaths, they would discontinue any such drug. We have far, far surpassed that. We are now in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands worldwide of deaths that have occurred as a result of this. We must bring these criminals to justice. Now, we are an enactment. We are here to show the public the type of evidence that could be presented in a real grand jury proceeding, the type of evidence that could be presented in a criminal court. We are not a criminal court. We have no authority to do anything except to inspire those of you who are willing to watch this and have listened to the experts, inspire you to take action and start out with that action by voting in favor of indictments against the 6 alleged or purported defendants. And those people were named by Dr. Reiner Fuellmich at the beginning. And that was Drosten, who created the PCR test just for the purpose of detecting coronavirus, although even the PCR test says we cannot, even a positive PCR test will not tell us if you have coronavirus. You could have other things, the flu, Ebola, SARS. You could have something else. So it's not even good at detecting corona. We have Dr. Fauci. We have Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, who is the general director of the World Health Organization. We have Blackstone, which is the money through which various funds have flowed to get this whole collaboration and scheme funded. We have Pfizer as well. So of these, all of these purported defendants, we ask that this court of public opinion return that indictment. What can you do further than this after this is all over? You can contact your local attorney generals. Not every attorney general is going to be friendly to this particular narrative. You should be warned. But in some states, they will be. And in those states, those what I would call the states that are a little bit more awakened, where they have a governor who has seen fit to give freedoms and not take away the freedoms from people. Use the people in those states, I would say South Dakota, Florida, there may be some other states that are very friendly, that whose attorney generals can also put together a case. And they have been invited by this group to contact Reiner Fuellmich to get contact information of any of the experts who testified in this enactment. They would testify in a court of law the same way. We also have revealed through experts, and we all knew this, that this is more than a physical battle. It is a spiritual battle. Mr. Swinwood alluded to that. We have had some people who testified who alluded to the spiritual battle. And the darkness is upon us. We may be in the last days. I don't know. But what we do have is an opportunity for all of us to turn to God and pray for the safety and the continuation of the human species as a species. Because these shots may very well be such a strong depopulation. They may be effective for that one purpose of the depopulation. They may create sterility amongst the young people and those who will be entering childbearing age. They certainly are affecting the vitality and health of those who don't die from it, but many have had adverse health effects that will last them the rest of their lives. We don't know what effects it has on children, and they are now vaccinating or injecting these children without knowing what the long-term effects are. And one of them very well could be sterility. So we want to pray for our continuation of our human species and for the courageous men and women who are willing to speak out against this. Not just the lawyers, we're talking about the experts, we're talking about the economists, we're talking about the authors who have written about this. We encourage you all to do your own research and come to the realization that this is pretty horrible to deal with. This is hard for people to understand that this is going on in what we consider to be a rather enlightened time or awakened time on our planet. It's not, unfortunately. We're not there yet, but we're getting there. And the more we speak out, the more people can hear this message. And we ask you all to stand up individually and spread the message yourselves around your family, your communities, and don't be afraid to speak up. Speak your truth as we have spoken our truth and as we have encouraged you all to have information that would allow you to speak your truth. And we're so grateful for all of you. The Court of Public Opinion, you've been fabulous. We've seen your comments, they're great. And we really appreciate that you have given us the support that we needed to provide this particular presentation. There's one more speaker after me, and I just want to say thank you very much. And our next speaker is going to be offering some very good solutions and hope, as we all should hold on to, as well as our faith in God. Thank you very much.
Thanks ever so much, Attorney at Law Anna Garner. And now we, as you just said, have one final speaker. I would like to greet Leslie Manookian. She's a former investment banker who has been promoting freedom of choice in healthcare for more than a decade. And with her nonprofit organization, Health Freedom Defense has just won a very important case in Florida. But now at this point, she's going to give us some words of hope.
Thank you, Vivian. Thank you, everybody who has preceded me and all of our experts who've testified over the many weeks and months. I just want to acknowledge that we are living in very uncertain and dark times. There's no doubt about that. We are witnessing and experiencing attacks on our way of life, our livelihoods, our rights, our freedoms, literally our cultures. We're also experiencing what is known in common parlance as gaslighting. These are perversions of science, perversions of truth, perversions of the law, and even reality around us. We're being lied to on a routine basis that is undeniable at this point. Alarmingly, these attacks have been led by our own governments and by non-governmental organizations such as the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization has put forth, at the behest of the United States federal government, international health regulations, which would alter the international health agreements, which bind member nations of the World Health Organization. They've put together, they're working right now on a global pandemic treaty. And together, these changes would transfer an extraordinary amount of power and control to the unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats at the World Health Organization, in violation of our own individual sovereignty as human beings and the sovereignty of our nations. We are living through an attempt to usurp control of our bodies, our nations, and literally our world under the pretext of a public health emergency. We've heard from experts that there really truly is no emergency by any historical definition of the term. There is no pandemic. And I'll speak in a moment to some evidence that I believe points to this. Authorities are denying the science that we have unveiled, revealed, that documents the failure of their policies. They pretend it doesn't exist, even when it comes from very respected elite institutions like Johns Hopkins University in the United States. Research there has proven that masks, isolation, home imprisonment, these experimental jabs, et cetera, are not actually helpful. Rather, they're destructive. These measures that have been pushed on us by our supposedly elected leaders, our representatives, have not been helping us. They've been destroying our lives, destroying our small and medium-sized businesses, destroying our ability to earn a living, destroying the fabric of our society that binds us together, and much more that we hold dear. And yet, these governments are trying to reinstate these policies. There are mootings coming out of Germany and other countries requesting that mask mandates be reintroduced, that legal provisions be made to re-implement lockdowns and other home imprisonment measures. The point is that it's very easy to become disillusioned in this situation that we inhabit, but we must not let down our guard. We must remain vigilant. And I think it is so important that each and every one of you know that there is so much hope. Those of us fighting for basic human freedoms have had many wins in the recent weeks and months. There was a win in Australia against vaccine mandates. In India, the Supreme Court declared that vaccine mandates are illegal. They are a violation of the most basic of human rights. In the United States, Health Freedom Defense Fund defeated the federal travel mask mandate. Now, the United States government is appealing this ruling, but what I want to share with you about this is what's noteworthy about it. In the government's appeal, they did not request an expedited hearing or briefing schedule. They did not request that a higher court overturn the ruling of the lower court, which struck down the mask mandate. Now, what does that tell us, friends? It tells us what you and I already know. which is that there is no public health emergency. If there were a public health emergency and they believed that masks did anything to address it, they would be working to overturn that lower federal court, the district court's ruling. They would be working to expedite the process, and they are not. They are appealing this for one simple reason, and that is because they want to defend the power and control that has been usurped by the administrative branches of our governments. This is about power, not public health. Something else that's very encouraging that's happened in very recent weeks is that we've defended the World Health Organization's recent attempt to transfer more power to the World Health Organization. I share these wins because I want you to remain hopeful. Please do not give up hope. There are good people everywhere. I urge you to stay positive. And even though I'm urging you to stay positive, I don't want you to take your eye off the goal, which is the necessity that each and every one of us human beings share to defend our human rights and freedoms. The attempts to rob us of our freedoms are not over, and we cannot stop. We cannot reduce the extent to which we are paying attention. We cannot take our eye off the ball. I'm trying to avoid American idioms, but we must remain focused on the end goal. We also must remain inspired by these good judges and good courts who are ruling in defense of law. They are upholding law and order. They are defending the interests and rights of the people. There are also good politicians all over the world who are speaking out and who share our commitment to the ideals that we hold so dear, namely the primacy of the individual, the sacred right of every individual human being to bodily autonomy and to direct their own lives, to the sovereignty of our nations, to the accountability of our public servants. We are united in our certainty that human life is sacred and that human life triumphs any technology that man can envision or invent. Though the World Health Organization continues its efforts to amass power in service to this global control system, and though it's aided by the World Economic Forum and its operatives, they continue their efforts to install what we can only describe as a dystopian, technocratic global governance system. We, my friends, number in the billions. They are but a handful. You have seen and heard the evidence presented during this people's grand jury over many weeks and months. You, like myself, are aware that this evidence is being hidden by the corporate media. It is up to you to vote based on this evidence. And it's also up to you to remain hopeful and strong in your commitment to defend your rights and beliefs and hold accountable those who have violated them and continue to do so. I encourage you to stay strong in your convictions that truth, that decency, and that human freedom will triumph in the end, because it will. We will. Of that I am certain. And I am both honored and privileged to stand with you and everyone else here present today and present with us over recent weeks and months at this critical time in our human history, with full confidence that we will indeed prevail in the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Yeah, now it's up to you, the audience of the grand jury investigation. You are the court of public opinion. And we would now like to invite you to vote on whether the evidence presented during the grand jury investigation is sufficient to indict all 6 putative defendants. The voting will take place via Telegram. The link can be found on the grand jury website, which is grand-jury.net. I think a lot has been said today. We have summarized what we've found out during the investigation. And I think it's very important, I would like to agree on that one with you, Leslie, that we must remain hopeful. And I'm absolutely sure that our hope is justified and that we actually, if I may say this, have already won. It's really just that the people have to see what's going on and we all have to come together, like as we did here in the grand jury investigation, like people from so many nations and from so different cultural backgrounds. And I think this has been a very inspiring experience. And I hope that people do take inspiration from this to connect also not only on the legal field, but in all other sectors of sectors and realms of life, like family-wise or like other business areas, and really stand together as human beings. And I think we'll be free soon. Rainer, maybe you would like to make a final statement.
I can only say that I am very proud to be a member of this group here, and I do believe that each and every one of us, and of course all of the experts, are going to make an impact. And I think if the public, if our audience, if our viewers convey this message of truth and hope, then there can be no doubt that we will win. I'm especially grateful for Judge Rui accompanying us here and guiding us through this. But of course, it'll be even more important for the general public to act on this. So please indict these criminals and please spread the information that we have collected through this joint effort here.
Yeah, so now I think it can be, I'm not sure if it's already now up, but you can find the link on the website, and the voting is possible. I think it's for the next 7 days. You should find all that information on the website. And then we'll be back with some results. We'll let you know what's going on.